This is a Dicenius Review, and I'm Alexandru Constantine. Welcome back to another fantastic episode. This is actually an interesting day. It's actually Sunday morning here, November 3rd when I'm recording this, and I woke up extra early on a daylight savings day in order to prepare for this episode and also record early in the morning, much earlier than I usually do in the afternoon, and that's because we have a special guest today. But before we get into the guests and we start having our conversation, I want to point out that when you listen to this episode, and I believe my goal to release it is going to be this upcoming Friday, the United States presidential election will have come and gone. So the world that you're going to be listening to, living in while listening to this, is going to be, somewhat different than the world I'm recording this in. And I can't lie that I don't have some level of trepidation, whether, if we end up discussing anything more current political elements or any current event type stuff, that everything we say is going to be completely, erased and proven wrong or completely overwritten by the events of this upcoming week. So yes, this should be interesting, and I think even listening to this episode will be interesting because you're kind of listening to a week-long time capsule, and due to the accelerated nature of current history. Now, as you guys know very well, when recording this, this podcast and also my writing on Substack, I'm first and foremost a fiction writer. My interests are culture, art, literature, and any type of esoteric, but mostly focused on cultural elements. So I don't really go much into politics, and I don't want to go much into politics either. So when I have guests like today's guest, and I'll introduce him in a second, there's a level of trepidation on my part where I don't want to go too far into politics, specifically current day politics. Why? Because current day WWF political party politics really fucking bores me. It's so easy, and it's such the low-hanging fruit to get into, my guy versus your girl versus my guy, that type of thing. And it's really, the whole thing is very tedious and draw, and I don't want to get into that. I'm much more interested. And once again, you're going to say, but Alex, you always talk about politics or political concepts. Yes, and that's true. But the way I talk about politics and the way will continue to talk about politics is in the way that I am particularly interested in politics. And I'm interested in politics from a cultural perspective, from a way that a writer would approach politics. Is Dostoevsky a political writer? The answer on the surface would be no, right? But you look at his novels like Demons, that completely deal with cultural political elements, right? The entire novel could not exist without the fact that most of the characters are Western liberals or Western German idealists slammed into a small Russian village, and the effect of their philosophies that they brought from the West, from their studies in the West, smashing with traditional Russian Orthodox ideologies. So in a way, Demons is a political novel, and probably Dostoevsky's most political novel, and one of his best novels, which I highly recommend you read. But he doesn't approach individual, micro politics, whether it's discussing senators and politicians and that type of thing. He's discussing the greater trends of political theory and the greater trends of political philosophy. And that's the part I find interesting. I am much more interested in, for example, in the inner workings of a political campaign, like, for example, Vice President Kamala Harris's political campaign, than I am in her actual policies. Why is that? Because I'm interested in the thoughts of these kind of people that are involved in that type of thing, and how they approach the world, how they see the world, and how they want to change the world, and how the greater culture responds to their ideas. And the same goes for the former President Trump's campaign. I find that interesting. And I find the memes and the Trump egregore almost more interesting than Trump and his policies himself. I am much more interested in 2016's young adult reaction to the presidential election, which in my lifetime has been the first time I've seen so many young people involved on a conservative side versus the kind of usual default of the young people being on the left automatically by default. So I find that a lot more interesting than the actual micro political elements, right? I find the egregores around politics, the crazy people that spout, insanities on Substack and everything. I find them all much more fascinating because the psychology behind that element is very interesting. And of course, as a writer, right, my goal and my job, and ultimately, I guess my ethos when it comes to writing is that I want to speak the truth. I want everything, whether I'm writing a science fiction piece, a horror piece, or even a literary autofiction, I want to tell the truth, right? Truth is the final deep down like element of all great writing. So in order to tell the truth, you have to approach a world where these political ideologies that exist in the present are there, or at least in the background, because your characters and your elements have to respond to the reality outside the page. And also every piece of writing, every piece of fiction, every film, every play is in a way a time capsule, in a way a thermometer that gauges the present day cultural egregore or cultural psychosphere of the people involved in the writing. So yes, I will cover some politics, but it will be more on a macro trend. I am much more interested in the cultural element. I will leave the more micro political kind of stuff to my guests and Fisto, and I will avoid that. But I'm not going to block myself from having these conversations, okay? And then please try not to pin any silly ideas of who or what I'm going to vote for. I am ultimately in the Junger camp, okay, of being a rebel, anarch, and I do whatever the fuck I want. I will vote for everybody and nobody. And then on Tuesday, before this current election, and then, before you're listening to this episode, I will probably forget to vote. I'll be honest. Okay. I'll put it in my phone and I'll shamble over there to the school next to my house, but most likely I'll get off of work and be like, man, I don't feel like doing this. Okay. So, you can criticize me for all you want, but you know what? That's my prerogative. All right. So today let's talk about our guests. Okay. First of all, we have Fisto. What up, Fisto?
Hey man, good morning. How are you?
Is morning is gloomy and cold out here in South Carolina. All
Sounds
right.
like my sinuses at the moment.
Oh
So
man,
I'll simply apologize ahead of time.
dude, I got like
When I blow
Allegra.
my nose on pod.
I took an Allegra and I used some Flonase just before sitting down to record this because my sinuses have been killing me. But let's introduce our guest. Our guest is a very special one, coming from all across the world. Mr. Anhaf Ibn Quay. All right. And Mr. Anhaf, he was a Substacker and a podcaster. On Substack, he writes The Fall of the West, which is his Substack, and then The Annals of America, which is a podcast that is currently on hiatus, but I know he's going to up the project. If you've been on Substack and you have, followed the discourse and the greater sphere of people that listen to this kind of stuff, Anaf has been all over comments and what do you call it? What are those notes and note stacks and all sorts of things. And I've enjoyed reading his work. I don't always agree with them, but once again, I don't always agree with everybody. All right. So welcome, Anaf. How are you doing today?
Good day to Sir Fisto. Good day to Sir Alexandru. Morning for you two fine gents. Afternoon where I'm at, but no, doing well. And yeah, looking forward to it. With regard to the micropolitics stuff, I don't like that stuff either. I only dive into that stuff just because for my purposes, whether it's being a student of Spengler or doing all these other things, right? You got to sometimes wade into that cesspool, right? So it is what it is. You kind of hold your nose and do it, but you do it because you do it for the larger trends and trying to analyze those.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a completely it's a fine line to walk because it's very easy. Look, if I wanted to, make money off this podcast or off of my Substack, I could become one of those bots, that just spams all kinds of like, Kamala Harris stuff, and I'm pretty sure I'd get a check in the mail. And you see these guys, they appeared on Substack like yesterday, and they already have like solid orange check marks. And I'm like, who the fuck pays money to listen to this stuff, right? I mean, and I'm not even like, I'm not even taking the side here, okay? I'm not even saying that Kamala or Trump is better or whatever. But I click on some of these guys, and I'm like, I'm out of pure sheer like curiosity, it's like the equivalent of like looking at like goatse videos or whatever, and I want to see what they're saying. I'm like, I want to see like,
oh man,
like what the fuck is going on over
what is
here?
this
My
guy
God.
saying? What is this guy saying that he has thousands of paid subscribers?
I hear them talk about women's reproductive rights, and I'm like, okay, so the right to kill your offspring, that's what you're talking about. Basically,
well,
that's what you're talking about.
Look, even okay, so that stuff, okay, that conversation can be interesting, right?
Yeah.
That conversation can blossom.
It can be interesting. It can be interesting, but they make it into a slogan, right?
Right,
When you ask them what you mean by that, they always say women's reproductive rights, and I'm like, okay, well, elaborate your position. What do you mean by that, right?
There is no elaboration,
There is no elaboration. Yeah, exactly.
Because honestly, look, if you want to sit here, we're not going to do this today because I rather fucking gouge my eyeballs out with a ice pick, right?
But if you reproductive rights, reproductive rights.
If you want to discuss
my eyes out when I read politics,
right? If you want to discuss abortion, right? I will sit down here and I will argue pro-abortion with you all day, okay? I will take a pro-abortion stance and I will argue it with you, okay? And I think I will do a fine job because I suffer from oppositional disorder, right? So if you
gotcha.
If you take a position, I will take the opposite. I'll be like, look, I'll kill all the motherfucking babies, right? Okay? But I think that I would argue it. Okay, I obviously don't believe that. Oh my God, I just lost 30 more subscribers for sure. Anyways, I don't particularly, I feel like their arguments are complete sloganeering and completely retarded.
Yeah.
But it's not even, that conversation alone can open further conversation, right? But then you click on these things and these guys have thousands of paid subscribers, and I'm like, who the fuck is giving you money to spout completely inane stuff?
Very suspicious.
Right.
Yeah, it's very suspicious what's going on.
Right. We're not talking about, policy discussion or discussions on immigration and migration patterns of humans. And we're not talking about deep economic conversations or even deep cultural conversations on the idea of liberalism or progressivism. It's completely like fucking like brain dead stuff. We're talking about like these people are like corpses with like a brain worm, like like eating their like jellified brains. And it's so boring. And I'm like, you're paying money to listen to to read this level of stupidity, right? I mean,
oh yeah.
Yes, and on the right, in our sphere, you tend to have the doomer nihilists, right? And those guys are boring. You look on Twitter, and it's like every single day. All right, guys, get your guns ready. We're gonna go fight. I'm like, shut the fuck up, dude. None of that's gonna happen.
Yeah. John Michael Greer said it best a while ago. It's like there's two groups of people, right? There's the group who's like, well, apocalypse is going to show up any day now. The nukes are going to fly. Everyone's going to die. And it's going to be Mad Max, Zombie Horde, or whatever. That's the first group. And the second group is, look, apocalypse is not going to happen. We're going to have fusion power, interstellar migration, and artificial intelligence. Man is going to march out of the caves and into the stars. And it's going to be like the starry sky. And we're going to like move in every direction, expanding infinitely, right?
Right.
Those are like the two main modes. And every ideology...
Any day now.
And every modernist ideology today, right? Whether it's the neolibs, who are like the super normie type, like leadership classes in the West, whether it's everybody else or what have you, right? It's always a derivative from one of these two strains of thought.
Right. Any day now, if, on the more left side of things, you have the guys that are like, well, once we get rid of the fascist Nazis, Mussolinis, right, we're going to have gay space communism, Star Trek, we're all going to be kumbayaing through space, and it's going to be so awesome.
It makes me think of one phrase that I constantly hear. And the moment I hear this phrase, I immediately turn off to that person for the rest of my life. All you need to do is just...
No.
And then some silver bullet that's just, bro. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, ultimately, that is the core problem with for example, all ideological, progressive type
Yeah.
Marxist, or even on the right wing governments. If you just kill everybody, then we'll have it perfect. If you just kill all these people, this country will
Yeah.
be perfect. And it,
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, if you look at it, that is the core of all
Yeah.
kind of Faustian forward-thinking political movements, right? If you just kill all the
Yeah.
Jews,
Yeah.
Germany will be perfect. If you just kill all the
Yeah.
kulaks, Soviets will, it'll be perfect.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. And the thing is, Sir Alexander, bang on the money. The thing with liberalism, and people like to bitch and whine about liberalism nowadays. But one of the things liberalism got right was that it realized that, hey, my competitors, communism and fascism, they're just gonna wear themselves out, right? In the case of fascism, right, the guy basically, 1,000-year Reich ended in 12 years. In the case of communism, rather, it went on for a few more decades. But it's always the same problem. The problem is, I think, Sir Pfister alluded to it. You've got the silver bullet. You've got this notion of infinite progress and what have you, infinite growth, infinite progress, and so on and so forth. And liberalism looked at that and it's like, okay, well, I'm just going to sit here and just do nothing, I guess, and they'll just wear themselves out. And that's basically what happened, right? I mean, it's a very non-dramatic way of putting it, but when Francis Fukuyama was talking about the end of history, which I don't agree with, right? But when he was talking about the end of history and the last man, this was actually what he was referring to, namely that liberalism, Western style democracy, and these types of things. Why did it win? Well, it won because these other guys basically self-destructed, right?
Right.
They kind of did all these mass killings. They did all this okay, well, we gotta build this utopia here or whatever. And liberalism's just okay, well, markets and capitalism and democracy and yada yada yada, right? And so now we've got other trends restarting history right now. But when he did write that book and when he did write his article, late 90s, not late 90s, sorry, late 80s, early 90s, right? This was actually a worldview you could kind of, if you were in academia or whatnot, you could sort of subscribe to it and be sort of respectable, right? But that's where things are at, basically.
Well, so now, and I know you guys are going to I think you guys are going to disagree, and some people are going to disagree with me. And I'm going to make my quick prediction. Okay, so this is I'm going to schedule this podcast for Friday morning, so it's going to be.
Go for it.
Let me see what date.
Oh boy,
what date is this? Okay,
it's the third.
Okay, this is the 3rd on the 8th. You'll be listening to this. If you're listening to right as you downloaded it the first time, this is going to be Friday the 8th, right? A few days after the election.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to predict who's going to win the election, right? But I'm going to predict what's going to happen. Nothing.
Okay.
All right. Everything is fake and gay right now, and after the election, it will continue to be fake and gay, on forever, for all eternity. Because that's
it'll be even worse. It'll be even worse because my prediction is that we will not know the winner of the election on the 8th, which is the Friday. Because what's going to happen is you're going to have these states that are going to count the votes and they're going to stop counting and they're going to be like, oh, we can't find all the ballot boxes. And sorry, guys, it's going to take a bit longer. I think that's actually what's going to happen.
Well, okay, let's delve into a little bit of micro politics. I'll do it. I'll break the rule, right? So
go for it.
Hold on. I gotta have my prediction.
Go for it. Let's see your prediction. I want to see
my prediction. My prediction is that Florida man will rise, take control of North America, and our vengeance will be made manifest throughout the globe. So that's my prediction. That we've simply been lying in wait, and when all of you fuckers are distracted by the fake and gay election, we will strike. And it will be a crusade
that's believable. Hey, listen,
it'll be a very fake. It'll be a very fake and gay election. Absolutely.
You know what?
The fuckery will just have begun, and it's going to be the worst kind of fuckery where no one, even if something is happening, no one's going to know what's happening. No one's really going to know what's happening. 100%. That much I could say I feel fairly confident about. All Florida man jokes aside, in my mind, it's
believable.
Who the hell knows what's going on right now?
To be fair, my wife and I have been talking about, if we're going to move anywhere out of South Carolina, it's going to be to St. Augustine. Yes. So, I might join the Florida Republic.
Alexandria's going to move to St. Augustine, honey. We're going to set up our glorious Floridian Republic.
Yeah, I do. I like St. Augustine a lot. I mean, it's one of I believe it's the oldest city in the United States, right? It's one of the oldest settlements. Yeah. Okay, so here we go.
Augustine likes you a lot.
I like it. I spent a day there and I loved it. So here's the way I look at it, right? From a
Go for it.
medium level political taken for listeners, I am not endorsing or taking anything. Like I said, I probably won't even fucking bother to vote because I find it boring. I think that if you look at the way things are in the Harris campaign, and if I was a Democratic operative right now, if I worked for the Democratic Party or I was invested in the Democratic, the Democratic campaign or the greater, to use Yarvin's, the cathedral, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Kamala is a disaster for me, right? Because I have nothing. She gains me nothing except ill will.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Right?
Oh yeah.
Because they've in 2019 or whenever the last election was, right? It was all about, we're going to do changes, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. And then they've had 4 years of just a giant fart, that, really turned a bunch of moderates against them. Because unfortunately it's easy to be the rebel, right? The whole identity of much of the left, or at least the voting left, is the rebels, rebels from Star Wars, right? The rebels from Star Wars, right? That's who they are. They're fucking Luke Skywalker, and then you have that dipshit fucking
They're
Luke
gonna
Skywalker.
save all of us.
Yeah.
They're gonna save all of us from the evil empire, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
And what Star Wars sucks at, besides everything, because Star Wars sucks, but one of the major things it sucks at is because none of the writers for Star Wars have the balls to actually show what happens after the rebels win.
Yeah,
right?
Very important.
It's easy to be the fucking rebels when you're fighting the evil empire and being the good guy, but then you got to rule it. You got to rule the fucking place, right? You got to, Luke Skywalker and Princess Leia had to rule an intergalactic empire, right? And one of them had to, be
went incredibly well.
Right.
It went incredibly well.
Yeah. Okay,
it went so well. It went so well that in the later movies, a secret resurgent empire was able to build, an entire new system-destroying Death Star. That's how good they were.
But here's the thing, right?
The empire.
Those 3 movies, which I've never seen and never will see, right? But I've read a little bit about them. I don't blame you,
but yeah,
right. I've never seen and never will see. Those really illustrate the progressive liberal mindset, right? And what I mean is that once the second Death Star in Return of the Jedi was blown up and all the little freaking bear people and shit were dancing around on skulls of stormtroopers or whatever the fuck they were doing, and money was being made on action figures throughout the far galaxy, far, far away. What next, right? Leia's got to be in charge, and Luke's got to lead the religious resurgence of the Jedi, right? So you've got these 2 pillars of traditional society, right? You have, the king class, the priestly class, right? And the thing is, the progressive left doesn't know what to do with either of those. They don't know how to run things. So they basically had to renege the whole thing in the following 3 movies because they don't have the conceptual thought pattern on how to fucking run anything. Right. So it was easy for them to picture, the rebels fighting the bad guys, but then they had to become the bad guys, or they had to become the rulers of this galaxy. And the writers of Star Wars do not have the mental conceptual knowledge to really fully even show Leia being in charge of the goddamn galaxy. Right. So their response to the religious angle was to have Luke run away and drink, green milk from the tit of some alien. And I don't know what happened to Leia. She girl bossed around the galaxy for a little bit, but did she run anything? Did she run the cities? No. So what did they do? They just blamed the Nazis. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They found some stooges, they basically found like the good old boys, like angry, white dudes or whatever. Like what were those guys back in 2020? The guys out of New York, that were always fighting at protests and stuff. What the fuck were those guys?
Antifa?
Not Antifa, the guys on the right.
Proud Boys, I believe.
Proud Boys, right? The Proud Boys, right? They found the Proud Boys resurgence or whatever, and that's what the new empire was, you know? And they're angry at everything, and they're like, okay, we're gonna get these guys. They're gonna be the new bad guys because we have to define ourselves in opposition to something because they have they have nothing, they have no skills to rule. And that's what you saw in the last 4 years is that they can't really implement their plans because their plans are retarded and everybody hates them when they actually get implemented. So the entire identity of your typical progressive person is fighting Mussolini, fighting the fascists. You know, it's basically Quentin Tarantino-esque like stupidity, basically. You know, when it comes right. Well, there's nothing. They have to always be the opposition, and without the bad guy, there's nothing there. Which is this is why I always say it's WrestleMania politics, right? So I think the saddest person in the last 4 years was the news media, right? Your average reporter. Your average reporter can make fucking bank, rallying against Trump Nazis or all this stuff, right? But they spent the last 4 years having to basically play cover for, constant ineptitude and just, sclerotic stupidity, right? Where they're like, well, maybe he's not that bad, or maybe he's not, or this is the New York Times case for why like being retarded is a good thing for America. Or something like that. You know what I mean?
Man.
And you saw that, right? So, I mean, listen, if you're in this situation and you can tell just by, reading between the lines of articles on, micropolitics, you can see that party, that campaign is completely splintered, and there are people, stabbing each other in the back, and there's really no adults running this thing. It's all a bunch of like 30-year-old millennial women that all hate each other. And right? And if you're an actual operative, and I'm not talking about the low-level guys. If you're one of those guys that's a reptile, sitting on your reptile throne, right? The last thing you want to do is get drugged down with this stupidity, right? And the best thing for you to do is to revitalize your base. And you revitalize your base by giving them an evil empire. So a Trump victory would be an ideal situation. They can get the money again. They can get the news flowing again. It's so exciting. Right now there's probably a bunch of people, and I'm talking about editors, not like your stupid, like, intern, online reporter, but like, I'm talking about your like actual people that like run the damn show at a newspaper or any media empire. They're like, please let Trump win because we're going to have fucking 4 years of shit to write about. Actual interesting stuff, right? As opposed to like 4 years of having to play cover for freaking nonsense. And it's just so obvious, right? The second if Trump wins, that's when all that money can flow again, and they can create their groups to go out in the street. And because, most progressive people they want to be oppressed in a way, right? That, putting on the pussy hat and going to Washington DC, that makes them feel like their grandma that like, didn't shave her armpits and like fought on the streets of like Berkeley in 1969, That's exciting. That's real politics for them. That's what they want, right? Because the second that everything goes their way, it's boring again. And now they have to deal with boring politics, not the fun, exciting politics. I guarantee you 90% of the people that go to those things are just going there to hook up with somebody else from college, Like, I'll go along because, Cindy's going and maybe I can get laid afterwards, yay, pussy hat, And let's be honest here, right?
Oh my God.
Right? And ultimately, right. Ultimately,
Yeah.
that's my prediction. My prediction is that they're going to allow to have Trump win because he's more exciting, and they have everything to benefit, and the left has everything to lose from another 4 years of a boring. The best thing. Okay, now the best thing for the right. The more Yarvin right is to let Kamala win. Let them sink this shit. Accelerate, go full blown Nick Land on this stuff, right?
Yeah.
Let her wreck everything. But ultimately, Trump's a boomer, and he's going to do boomer things, and everything will be fake and gay. And that's kind of my prediction. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Fair.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, am I wrong
Absolutely.
or?
No, you're correct. I generally agree. I'm actually much more pessimistic than you are. I think the time for politics is over. I think politics will not be able to resolve these issues, right? I don't know if you gentlemen know this, but the Treasury came out with their official numbers a few months ago. And let's actually now go away from micropolitics and let's zoom out a bit. I think the number they came up with was $870 billion per annum is now being spent on interest on the debt. So what that means is it is now either on the same level or higher than the defense spending in the entire country. The only thing higher than that is, I believe, like Medicare and that kind of stuff, right? But this is now a doom loop. Basically, like if I told you, hey, in 5 years' time, the cancer cells in your body are going to cover your entire body. Well, it doesn't have to be 5 years, right? Like people die a lot earlier than that, right? So that's basically what's happening to the American economy right now. This is like a mathematical outcome, namely that they are going to now go through a Soviet-style bankruptcy, except much worse because you're dealing with like 36 trillion plus in debt of this entire thing. And the 800 billion, I think I looked at a few estimates. One guy said 20 years is the amount of time it'll take for the debt to basically cover everything to the point where there will be no money left for anything, whether it's roads, bridges, hospitals, and so on and so forth. And I think another guy, he made the estimate that it's actually not 20 years, it's more like 10 to 15 years. But, the ballpark is that we're basically going to see the bankruptcy in the coming years and months. America at this point in time, like they can elect Kamala, they can elect Trump, unless either one of them is willing, ready, and able to go, yeah, guys, we're going to default on the debt. Yeah, things are only going to get worse, right? And so that's why I don't really care about micropolitics. I'm more interested in, America, let's look at it 30,000 foot bird's eye view. What's happening, right? And when I see that view, I'm like, this is not going to work out, basically.
But
for me,
go ahead, Fisto.
Yeah,
go ahead.
just real quick. Like I'm going to take what you guys just said and zero it down, zoom back in, past the micro to the personal. And for me, yesterday I went to the polling station here in town. I cast my ballot. I voted for Trump, and I didn't vote for Trump because I think he's actually going to fix anything. I have no idea what's going to happen this week, what's going to happen into the future.
Yeah.
Is it going to be retarded? Yes. Like that is the one thing I know for sure is that it's going to be stupid. All right, it's going to be ridiculous. However it turns out, doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, I think probably the thing that really influenced my vote were the conversations I had with colleagues and students at my school. And I want to be able to say honestly, guys, I voted for Trump, and then be a voice of moderation in my community. Like I wanted to position myself like that. So I have to be honest, right? I'm a teacher. I'm not going to be able to lie and just say I voted for whoever. Like I want to be able to be like, yep, filled it right in. There it is. All is well. But then, going forward, I want to be able to say, guys, like we need to focus on the community. We need to focus on ourselves.
Oh yeah.
I'm ultimately trying to position myself for when everything finally comes crashing down.
Absolutely.
That me and my family are in the best position they can possibly be.
Absolutely.
In. And I got to just look at the reality of where I am, what's going on. What are the people around me going to think? Like, one of the situations that I like to study, one of the things that we like to talk about, Alex, especially and Anaf as well, the Spanish Civil War. I keep thinking to myself, not that we're going to have a Spain situation, but whatever happens, kicks off, the side I'm going to be on is going to be based on where I am.
Oh yeah.
Am I on the right? Am I on the left? This group, that group? It's wherever I happen to physically be when shit pops off. That's it.
There you go.
So
there you go.
All right, I got to do what I got to do to be ready for that. And that's kind of where my ultimate truthful thoughts are, and why I'm, what's driving my decision making here. I'm trying to be the best anarch I can possibly be.
Right. So look, one thing that we need to, in these kind of conversations, it doesn't get mentioned enough, in my opinion, is we have to define what we are talking about when we are talking about America, right?
Yeah.
Go for it.
So there's America, and then there's the United States government, right? Or the greater American empire, right?
Yes.
So when we talk about that kind of stuff, right, what we have to keep in mind is that they are two separate entities, right? America is my neighborhood, is my neighbor, is my streets in my small town in South Carolina.
Absolutely.
that's, it's even the big cities next to me, right? It's even the greater cultural element of America, right? America is, the movies and the television and the video games and in these conversations that we're having on Substack. That's America,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
When we talk about numbers and battles and wars and stuff, we really are talking about an entity that is above and separate from that actual institution of America, right? It's its own separate thing. And when you say something like, oh, we're going to go bankrupt, right? What you mean to say is that the United States government is going to go bankrupt.
Fair,
right?
Fair.
Yes, we ultimately still live in a republic, and there are 50 states. And you know what? The U.S. government, out of my taxpayer money, does not pay for the roads across the street from my house, right? The U.S. government does not pay for the water that comes into my house, right? It's the state of South Carolina, but not even the state of South Carolina. It's the local county that pulls the water from the Florida reservoir, which is beneath our feet. And
in my case, it's the water district.
Right. Like we actually might So ultimately, if the United States government goes tomorrow, the roads are not going to change in my neighborhood. The electricity is not going to change in my neighborhood.
You're correct. So you're correct, Sir Alexandru. There is a separation between the two, but it's not an absolute separation. So what I mean by that, here's the important thing. You're absolutely correct, right? Because the local things are going to retain their resilience. There's going to be a lot of stuff that can still work and function. But let me just quickly read you out a quote. And this is a very, very important quote, right? This is by Nate Higgins, right? Nate Higgins, he does some excellent energy work and whatnot. Okay, since money is a claim on energy, debt is a claim on future energy. Debt moves real energy and consumption from the future to the present. This only works well when our economy is growing and there are enough untapped resources to allow future growth to repay those debts. If the energy is not available at cheap prices, those debts will never be repaid. So the reason I bring up this quote is because, yes, at the local community level, that thing is separate from these abstract higher order things, the wars, the geopolitics, the geoeconomics, but it does eventually affect you, right? Like if America goes formally bankrupt, but informally it's already bankrupt, right? I think I sent you guys a graphic showing that the interest on the debt is actually now higher than military spending, right? It's like 980 billion, right? But if it does actually formally go bankrupt, there is an impact, right? You're not going to go to the grocery store and be like, oh, where are the bananas, right? There's probably going to be an outage of bananas. You're not going to see the bananas. And if you do see the bananas, it's probably going to be $5 per banana, right? Or it's going to be like, I don't know, $10 per apple or some crazy number right, like that, right? Because ultimately, infrastructure and these other things, technology, innovation, or what have you, right? They have to be things that are, transported and then taken care of. So you do need government, like the state, the government. Yes, it's not the same thing as the people, the voters, or the citizens, right? But you do need that structure on top, right? Anarchism simply doesn't work, right? So if you have that structure on top and it crumbles, the guys on the bottom, there are going to be people who succeed, obviously, right? But it's going to be very, very brutal, right? And, it's like Sir Kenaz, who's my co-host on my my podcast, not my podcast, but rather his one. We own it together, basically. But Eurabia Mania, that's the name of the podcast.
Right. I listened to a few episodes.
Yes. And one of the things we say is that, yes, some people are going to thrive, some people are going to be resilient, but the majority of people who are like, okay, I'm just going to drive to the grocery store and get my bananas and oranges. I'm sorry, folks. That's not the world you're going to be living in. Chances are you're going to see an outage of those things, right? And when I say outages, I mean it, right? I'm not talking about shortages. I'm talking about actual outages. And I'm talking about this happening probably at most a few years from now, right? That's where the trajectory is presently.
Right, and then like I said, I'm gonna try to keep this somewhat cultural, right? Is that
no worries?
Is that a bad thing, right? And what I mean,
not necessarily.
What I mean by that is that if you look, to go back to Fukuyama and a lot of the macro history of the 20th century, if you study history, one thing that stands out and is just blatantly obvious is that the 20th century is historically unique, right? The amount of explosive growth, right? You cannot go back any time in history and get anywhere near that level of explosive global growth. And the 20th century takes the gold medal in almost every category historically,
Exactly.
whether it's mass murder committed, wars, scientific progress, cultural and progress. You've had more and more and more of everything. Like look, the 20th century is an apex of human civilization, and I think that 1,000 years from now, if we have history books or, chips right into our brain or whatever, scrolls, saved by some kind of like proto, of new age monks or something like that, they're going to be talking about the 20th century as like a pivot point in human history.
Yeah.
And I think that no matter what, we weren't never going to keep on going. It just wasn't. There is no way to maintain that level of growth. And, and I think they knew this back in the 70s. I think they knew this back in the 80s, and you look at stuff and I'm not adverse to a more kind of gloomy doomerism when it comes to politics, right? Which you tend to have way more than I am. I'm more of a absurdist. I'm a Camus kind of guy, right? So I just think it's all going to be stupid because it's always been stupid and always will be stupid. But ultimately,
I agree with you.
Right.
I agree with you. Yeah.
Ultimately, if you even look at the 20th century, right? The Americans and Europeans and all, almost every nation on this planet has lived through some very adverse times. I mean, we had the Great Depression where we didn't have the fucking bananas, right? And we didn't have, citrus fruit and stuff. And, my people, the Romanians, for example, lived through, oppressive, Soviet style communism, and the Russians lived through oppressive Soviet, their own communism, right? And everywhere on this planet, we've had all kinds of like just disgusting, horrible events, and we made it. You know what I mean? Because ultimately in Romania, there was no supermarkets. And when you went to the store, you had to wait in line for 3 days to get like some piss watered milk, and like 2 eggs or whatever you got. Right. But guess what? People ate, people fucked, people watched movies, people, lived their lives, had children. Right. So
Of course.
My America is going to go on whether we are the top global empire or if we go back to being look, America before World War II, even really before World War I, to be honest, was a backwater. It was Australia, right? In a way, right?
Yeah.
I know you laugh, but you look at this.
It's true. Yeah. It's very true.
You look at the numbers. You look at the numbers of the military, for example, of the United States military entering World War I, and the United States had a smaller military than Romania entering World War I, right? And I'm talking about a small ass country in Eastern Europe, right? So we went in, a country, a bunch of backwater farm boys, picked up guns and got sent away to whatever the fuck to die, for whatever reason, right? And we made it, right? They made it through the Great Depression. They made it through the violent riots of the 60s and 70s. The exceptionally, look, I don't know if you've, lived in the United States, Akhnaf, but, all the cities right now.
I know some bros there.
Yeah.
I know some bros there, so I talk with them, so I kind of have an idea, but I don't have like a lived experience.
Okay, so I will tell you right now, there's a lot of doomerism about San Francisco and Los Angeles and all that stuff, right? All those cities are significantly better right now than they were in the 70s and 80s, okay? New York in the 80s was a fucking shithole, and it's gotten way better. Even with all the crime and all this stuff, the reason people are saying, oh my God, San Francisco so bad or Seattle so bad. Well, first of all, Seattle's always been shitty, right? You can tell Seattle was shitty because if you listen to 1990s music from Seattle, from like Nirvana and like Pearl Jam and stuff, they're telling you how shitty life was in those cities, right? But there was an element at Fukuyama's end of history in the mid to late 90s where things were just at an apex peak, right? And you can't stay at the tip of the needle forever, right? It's always going to go down. And when you're at the top, even a small incremental downgrade, right, can seem catastrophic, right? We do have a lot of that, but the United States, at least culturally, has a lot of room to fall because it got so damn high, right?
Absolutely. And like a dark age. Yeah, no, and you're absolutely correct. Apologies for interrupting, but you're absolutely correct. Like people need to understand that life goes on even during a dark age, right? So just being like apocalyptic about it and everything's over or whatever, right? Like there's going to be people in the deindustrial dark age, they're going to have the time of their life. They're going to look at this and go, yay, finally I can get a bunch of pickup trucks and a bunch of motorcycles and I can do whatever the fuck I want now, right? Like there's going to be people like that, and there's going to be people who are like, oh, we're not going to go to space anymore, oh, we're going to be depressed forever or whatever, right? There's, the human experience is rich and varied, right? For some people it's going to be amazing, for some people it's not going to be amazing, right? So I actually agree with you, right? Like it is the case that like it's not just the 20th century, right? Like even the Industrial Revolution itself is a huge historical anomaly, right?
Right.
Like before the year 1820, the largest city that was built was like, I think some people say Machu Picchu and a couple of these other places, but anyhow, the population never really exceeded 1 million. Like I think the Chinese got to like 1.1 million or whatever, but then London, because of steam, because of coal, because of these other things, right? Suddenly, not 1 million, it got to 2 million, right? And beyond. And when you get a city with 2 million or more people, there's a lot more other things you can do. You get concentration of mass, concentration of wealth, concentration of labor, and so on and so forth, right? And you're not going to see that 1,000 years from now because of energy realities, because of demographic realities, because of technological realities, right? But this is a unique 300-year, 400-year, I would say 300-year period. You're not going to see it come back because, again, the resources that were used to get to this point are being used up as we speak, right? So, but in that sense, yes, I agree with you that people will have fulfilling lives. It's just that it's going to be in a less energy-rich environment, right? And whatever it is that we call America or the successor states of America, like John Michael Greer actually agrees. He's like, America is a young nation, right? It hasn't developed, there is a American culture, but American culture in the Spenglerian sense has not developed from culture to American civilization proper, right? And that's going to take us a few centuries, a few millennia, and when it does develop, right, it's going to have its own unique markers. Again, people are going to thrive. Some people not so much, but this has always happened throughout human history, right? There's always been people who've thrived, and there's always been people who've not so thrived, right? So
right. So okay, like I said, a lot of what I'm going to say right now are thoughts that I have on the fly. So, listeners and you guys, please correct me or please feel free to disagree. These are not my hard iron-held beliefs that are well-researched or anything like that. But, I look at the end of the 19th century, and you look at the end of the 19th century, and the pinnacle of, that early 20th century civilization was, for example, the axis between London and Paris, right? You can't deny that all culture, came out of Paris and London, whether, the banking cultures and finance cultures came out of London, and then all your social kind of culture came out of Paris, right? At the fin de siècle era. And so many, there's a reason why almost every 20th century revolutionary philosopher and, anybody of note spent some time in Paris, around that time. And you look at England, and England, fought in World War II and came out the loser. Right, their greatest, greatest civilization up until the United States on this planet really belonged to the British, and they had the greatest empire,
largest empire,
largest empire, spun the world. That was where you're going to be, right? If you're gonna be an immigrant or a philosopher or a thinker or some kind of anything, you weren't going to go to fucking Florida, right? You were going to go to Paris or London, okay? And let's just be honest, right? And then the end of World War II happens, and the British go into full blown economic collapse. They go into austerity. And they just crap themselves for 40, 50 years, really until the 90s, right? And but they're still there. Their lives were still there, right? Yeah. They had they ate a little bit less, and but culturally, it was at that time that they came up with some of the best music and culture of the 20th century during that shitty era, right? In a way, they conquered America again through their cultural elements, right? Because the British definitely punch above when it comes to like art and
mhm.
culture compared to the United States. So, I mean, look, yes, you're right. We're not going to have the bananas, right? I see it. Look, I see it every day, right? I go to Publix. I don't know if you guys have Publix in Florida, Fisto, the supermarket. Fisto died.
Sorry, I was trying not to sneeze all over.
Do you guys have Publix over there?
Oh yeah, yeah. No,
Okay.
Publix is the thing down here. Yeah.
Yeah, so for the listeners, Publix is like the southeast supermarket chain. It's kind of bougie. It's kind of on the high end of prices, but it tends to have some of the best products around.
Oh yeah.
I'm really looking forward. I'm really looking forward to the Karen at Publix demanding to see the manager because she can't get strawberries, and the manager is just like Imperial collapse, ma'am.
Yeah,
That's why we don't have
it's like
strawberries anymore.
full culture, right?
She's like, and she just
man.
will not accept it. And the manager's just like, Rome has fallen. That's why you don't have strawberries.
Right, and ultimately, like we've all seen our grocery bills,
Oh
like
my gosh.
quadruple in the last 4 years. Like
Right.
I used to be able to go to a supermarket with like $100, and that would last me like 2 years, and two weeks, right? And now like I'll go and buy like 2 things of ice cream and a bottle of wine, and I'm like down $90, and I still have to buy dinner on top of that. Or one of the horrendous elements of things is like fast food. You used to be able to go to like McDonald's and feed yourself for like $10, or Taco Bell. I used to live off of like $5 meals at Taco Bell, and now like a one fast food meal is like $25 for one person. I'm like, how did I just I the other day I'm like driving, and my daughter wanted some like fast food or something, and we got like a Happy Meal and like 2 cheeseburgers, and it was like $40, and I was like, what the fuck? I could have just gone to like the regular restaurant, which hasn't gone up in price that much.
In my latest essay, I wrote a little bit about the Nika riots, and I'm just picturing to myself like 30,000 Karens in the Hippodrome,
Right,
complaining
like
why their supersized meal has gone
why?
up 750%
Yeah.
in the past
Yeah.
10 minutes.
Like we used to have Jack in the Box on the West Coast. It's
right.
like a fast food place, and they used to have the 99-cent Jumbo Jack, and
Oh, yeah.
I used to live off of that when I was in
Yeah.
high school, and it's like,
these types of crazy situations, the advice that you should give to people is, look, wherever you are right now, with the people and the resources and the community that you have, right? Because you're not going to be going to the supermarket store or the Happy Meal place or whatever and getting that stuff. You're going to have to barter with your neighbors, or you're going to have to figure out some other arrangement, right? That's
Make
what's going
friends.
to get you.
Make friends.
Yeah, make friends, make lots of friends.
All the friends. Everyone should love you
Everyone.
and
Look-
should want to take care of you.
So ultimately, though, yes, we've dropped to a lower level than 90s, right? But we are not even. You have to understand that some of the greatest advances in American culture and technology and everything happened in a time where people had a lot less. All right. People had a lot less, and a lot of our prosperity is artificial, and a lot of our prosperity really, okay. While we talk about GDP and income and this kind of thing, right? What you have to realize that the day-to-day middle-class American lives a pretty standard normal life. And most of that like great GDP wealth that like, the banks are making and the media companies and that kind of stuff, we don't see that, right? I don't see that. Fisto doesn't see that, right? Your teacher, your nurse, their lives, our lives are no different than our parents' lives, or our or grandparents' lives, right? So if the greater markets collapse, right, I'm not going to take a giant hit on my finances because I don't have fucking stock in Apple. You know what I mean? Right. And I could give 2 fucks if Apple goes out of business because I don't care. Right. Because a lot of this money is artificial. Right. A lot of this debt is artificial. Yes, it will definitely. There will be trickle down effects because shit always trickles down to us. Right. But ultimately, the middle class and the lower classes are going to actually have a lot more power in a way. And I say that because a lot of the economic power is geared at the top, right? At the top financial institutions, right? And they have a lot more buying power than us because the money is artificial in a way, right? Their money comes from investments, and it comes from the global market, which doesn't particularly affect us. You know what? Fuck it. I won't have a banana. But guess what? Across the street, there's an apple farm and there's a pumpkin farm, and I can still have, because where I live right now, you've had 4 or 5 generations of, rice farming, like descendants of slavery, right? That managed to survive in these goddamn swamps for hundreds of years, right? And none of them had stock. None of them had stock in Google. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yes.
I love the idea that I can't get bananas at the store anymore, but I'm surrounded by ranchers and I teach all their kids how to read. So,
right. Ultimately,
from here on out, let's go.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, do you see what I mean? It's like, yes, okay, a lot of the doom and gloom is going to happen, but it's not going to affect the middle and lower classes. It's not going to affect the fentanyl Joe sitting around fucking, smoking weed all day. You're right. It depends, right? But you know what?
Like, I'll give you an example. If you're in a area where you know your neighbors and you have arrangements and you figured out that, hey, we're going to live a poorer life, but that doesn't mean it has to be a less rich life, then yeah, you're going to do fine, right? But if you live in like Los Angeles, right, and you're like, I don't know, you work in the media industry, right, and the empire goes flop, well, now you don't have a job, and the worst part is you don't have any actual skills. Like, you can't actually work with your hands. You're basically useless, right? So you're a useless guy, and you're surrounded by other useless people who don't have food to eat and who are going to starve, and they're going to go crazy. Right? So this is what I'm talking about. Like, some people are going to do great. And for some people, they're like, okay, homeschooling, ranching, okay, local farms, community gardens, amazing, right? But then this other group of people, not so much, right? So it's a mixed bag, basically.
No, you're right. But see, what I'm trying to say is, I want those people to suffer. Fuck them. You see what I mean? Right? See, I'm from Los Angeles, right? I grew up in Los Angeles, right? All right. Los Angeles is a city. Los Angeles is a city that is run like a feudal like a fiefdom. You have these people, most of them from out of town, living in their mansions, making $10 million a month off of YouTube videos or other nonsense, or residual,
absolutely useless.
Yeah,
like these people are gonna be mauled to death in like the first opening months and years. Like, these people are totally useless.
Yeah. They're making.
I just want to clarify something. Speaking of totally useless, I fucked up a joke a minute ago. Tears for my martini is what I wanted to say, but I'm all hyped up on Dayquil and coffee, and I'm just like,
right.
I don't even know where I am right now.
I even missed it, but
please continue.
Los Angeles is a city that has this 1% or like maybe 5% of people that work in that industry, and they're all basically parasites on the rest of the city, because the majority of people that live in Los Angeles aren't working in media industry. Look, I grew up in Los Angeles, right? I probably met like 4 people in like that industry. They're insular. They're stick to their own neighborhoods. The majority of people are teachers, nurses, doctors, cops. that type of thing, right? Those people will be fine. Okay, if movie producer Joe can't make it to can't get a reservation at Fratelli's or whatever the fuck restaurant on Sunset Boulevard, well, fuck him. I don't care about him. You know what I mean? Ultimately, surrounding Los Angeles is farms and farmlands, and that's run by it's
absolutely
it's owned by people that are normal, and it's worked by Hispanic migrants. And you know what? If
you guys are blessed. Yes, you guys are blessed with amazing farmland, some of the best in the world. So many of you guys will do amazing, especially considering the fact that I think America has a very, very rich stash of Chernozem, which is like the black soil you find in Ukraine. You actually find it up there in like Minnesota. So you guys have a lot of stuff going for you.
Right. So, I guess what I'm saying is that like maybe a global economic collapse won't be such a bad thing, because I think that the hegemony of the Western world upon the planet has created lots of great, amazing things, but at the same time has created a upper class that is effete, sclerotic, and completely it to the point where now it is parasitical upon our money systems and our banking systems and our you see this kind of stuff. I mean, John Carter of Mars put out the little article this morning about the squirrel thing, but what it was really about was how we have a parasitical government system where you have a bunch of agents that just do nothing, and then the first chance they get, they'll flex their power, right? Well, so if the U.S. government goes broke and the animal control agencies that shoot your squirrel in the face no longer get a paycheck, I'm not going to cry, You have to realize that like a lot of these agencies, right, that the U.S. government funds out of taxpayer money and, will collapse once it does go bankrupt, right, is they do nothing for me. Right? They don't fix my roads. They don't bring my water. They don't do any of this stuff. What they do is they funnel money into foreign adventures or aid to that. But what they really do is they funnel money into their own paychecks, right? They're a self-fulfilling, Yarvin says it best. It's the cathedral where one age side feeds the other, and the other side gives ideological purpose for them to exist in the first place. And it's basically a sclerotic cycle. So, you know what? Maybe we need to cut the fat in a way, right? Maybe we need less of, like, for example, like our mine and Fisto's big enemy, the educational agents, the federal education agencies that I have to pay out of my ass to avoid for my daughter, because I have to put her in private school to avoid the stupidity and retardation that's made out of my taxpayer money. So maybe if that shit goes broke, maybe I'll be able to, send my kid to public school paid for the money that comes out of my taxes on my house, right? As opposed to that money getting sent to Washington, D.C. and being funneled into all kinds of stupidity. Maybe those guys lose their job because there's no money for them anymore. Maybe I can actually use my money or my resources here in my neighborhood to actually educate my child. So maybe that's not a bad thing. You're
gonna see homeschooling become the dominant thing in a few decades, right? Especially as whether it's the economic collapse or the downturn, whatever it is we want to call it, the dark age, right? You're going to see people, and especially this is going to happen as we see, I think 2026 to 2030. Art Behrman, he kind of calculated how much oil is going to peak or what have you, right? So once you get to that point, you're going to see people be like, okay, well, yeah, I can drive my car, but I'm just going to save up the fuel for something actually that's important in the future, right? In the meantime, though, I'm just going to go walking distance, or I'm going to bicycle, or I'm going to do all these other things, right? Simply because, number one, I can't afford doing these big, expensive road trips anymore. So you're going to see localization. You're going to see more community. You're going to see more people going, okay, the art people around me, they went bust. Well, too bad. Oh, hey, me and my neighbor, we can get together and put up some art stuff, and then the local kids and the parents or whatnot, they can have a look at that art exhibition, right? So we're not driving up to the fancy gallery and whatnot, and we're doing all these other things. So you're going to see more and more of that, absolutely, right?
Right.
In the year 2124, 100 years from now, do I expect most people in America to have running water and electricity? I do not, right? I think what's going to happen is you're going to have these localized grids. Some people will have solar water heaters. Some people will have some wind, maybe some hydropower, and so on and so forth, right? But people are going to use their resources sparingly. And let's say out of every 24 hours, they decide, hey, now is a good 4-hour time window to have some electricity. Let's crank up some electricity now with the generator, right? So this is the kind of future I'm kind of seeing, right, in the coming decades and centuries, as we kind of tip over and we head into the dark age, right? Again, it doesn't have to be a less rich life, but it's going to be a life where people have less resources and they're like, okay, we have to now conserve and we have to use these wisely.
I'm gonna disagree with you there, man. Okay,
go for it.
I'm gonna disagree because first of all,
go for it.
First of all, I disagree with the framing of a dark age, right? I don't think in this. I'm gonna coin this right now on this podcast. I don't think we're gonna enter a dark age, right? I think what we're gonna enter is we're gonna enter a skinny age, right? Right now,
the skinny age.
A skinny age.
I would say it's the same thing.
No. I disagree. Skinny as in hot and sexy, a fit age, right? I'm gonna give you a little bit of optimism in my opinion, right? And time will prove one of us correct, right? And this podcast will exist on the digital webs for posterity, but you're never going to be proven correct, because if I'm right, this podcast will remain, but if I'm wrong and you're right, that's probably going to get deleted by the collapse of the internet.
I would disagree simply because even if the internet is completely destroyed, there is going to be people in the future, archivists and whatnot, who are into this weird hobby of once upon a time there was an internet, let me see if I can scrounge things up.
Right.
So it won't be in time.
That'd be
So
great.
that
So okay, maybe the skinny age
Some
is
netrunner is going to find this and be
yeah,
like, "What the
maybe
fuck?"
maybe the
some crazy dude in like 3124 who pieces together 0.00001% of the internet is going to be like, what the fuck are these guys talking about? Yeah.
Right. So maybe not the skinny age, maybe the fit age. Okay. Look, what I think right now we're in a fat age. We're in the 90s were the peak fatness age, right? And the 2000s and the second decade of the 21st century and the third decade, we are in the diabetic age. Okay. We're in the age where we've had so much progress, so
Getting a
much.
little close to home there.
Sorry,
guys.
bro. That we
That's
are
all right, that's
we
all
are
right.
we are riding around in our scooters. We've got fat, swollen feet, and we're shoving burgers in our face. We're in that age right now, right? And I think that due to upcoming adversity, what we can do, if done right, we can shed the fat, because when the shit hits the fan, you gotta hit the push-ups, you gotta hit the pull-ups, right? And I think that one way we're gonna, you said we're 100 years from now, we're not going to have electricity and water. Well, you know what? The United States is sitting on billions of fucking barrels of oil.
I should correct what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So I should correct what I'm saying. I'm talking about a centralized grid for that stuff. I'm saying that whatever running water and electricity people have in the future, 100 years from now, it's going to be localized, right? So the example I used was like, okay, hey, now is a good 4-hour time window for us to have electricity. Let's crank up the generator. That's going to be the kind of society.
But once again, you're betraying the fact that you don't live in the United States. We don't have a centralized grid in the United States, right? We have state-run grids, right? So, for example,
sure.
the grid in South Carolina is not connected to the grid in Southern California, right?
Fair enough.
Southern California is run by Southern California Edison, and it powers.
You guys have state governors, absolutely.
Right.
You guys have state governors who basically like, this is my fiefdom, right? But I'm talking more about that, namely that you're not going to have that centralization at the state level as well.
Well, why not? Okay, so you take a state like
Well, maybe
Texas.
not all
Sure.
states.
Right, maybe not all states, right? But you take a state like Texas, right? That's sitting on
Yeah, that was the one.
barrels and barrels and barrels of oil, right? That's untapped, undrilled, right? What's going to stop them? Okay, let's say that we real fast, right? Let's say that we go into a collapse of the greater government, right? A trimming down, a fat, a defattening of the government, right? What's holding Texas? What's holding Texas and in honesty California? Because when I looked at California, when I lived in California, you could look off the coast of Los Angeles and you saw just miles and miles of ocean, and underneath that ocean is probably in so much oil just waiting to be tapped, right? That we don't tap, not because we can't or we don't want to, but because the state and federal, because the federal government tells us we can't tap it, right? We're not allowed to.
So,
right?
Okay, so it's actually much worse than that. Right? Like, and I think I used this example on Substack Notes, right? Somebody was telling me, well, why can't we just do like the red tape thing, and then the private sector and other individuals and community, they just excavate and drill, and they get all that energy, right? The issue is that something can be technically feasible, but economically unviable, right? So you always need margin for any venture, whether it's gas, whether it's nuclear, whatever it is, right? So one of the things that I tell people is, okay, well, Antarctica, right? There's 2 kilometers of ice sheets, right? What if I told you that, hey, there's this many barrels of oil underneath Antarctica, and there's this much gas or what have you, right? Me telling you that doesn't change anything, because you would still have to dig through the 2-kilometer ice sheet, right? And presently, and into the near future, and the long future, I would argue, there's not going to be an economically viable way of drilling that, right? And the reason there's not going to be is because technology is always a bounded variable. Technology is always bounded by your demography, number one, and your energy, right? Now, Texas... And, I'll use an example of Appalachia, right? Because that's an example I love to use. West Virginia, right? Massive, massive coal deposits. King Coal, once upon a time, they had all this other economic activity. Nowadays, not so much, right? That being said, if you actually look at the volume, they still have a shit ton of coal, right? But then you could ask the, question, okay, why are you guys not excavating? The coal is literally right there, right? And it comes down to the same problem, which is margin, right? Now, do I think people are going to use fossil fuels 100 years from now, 200 years from now, in small chunks? Right? So what you're going to see is, instead of a big diesel excavator to dig out the coal, a bunch of bros are going to grab their shovels and pickaxes and grab the coal and, mine it, by hand, right? Because they're not going to have access to the excavator. They're not going to have access to the diesel to fuel the thing, and so on and so forth, right? Now, some places might have some contraptions. They're like, oh, I excavated and scavenged something. I can use it this way. I can use it that way. But that's kind of the future, right? It's the scavenger society, right? The scavenger society of, okay, well, we can dig it. We can tap into it a little bit. But to tap into it even more, we need this additional energy, surplus energy that we don't have, right?
Okay,
yeah, go for it.
okay, so yeah, no, I agree with you, and I do understand the idea of margins very much so, right? And when you look at America's energy issues right now, they come from the fact that it is much cheaper and easier to buy oil from the Middle East, right, at a much better margin, bring it here, produce it and, spread it around the world. Right. But that once again, I consider that part of that upper kind of, that's part of the upper, kind of globalist fat, right? If that's gone,
sure.
if those ships can't, if the Middle East is no longer selling the oil and, the ships aren't bringing that stuff in and the ports are closed, right? What would stop us from going back to the way things were before the 60s, before we got
okay,
about,
so there's a couple of things.
Hold on, guys.
Yeah, go for it.
Quick question. What about manufacturing capacity in the United States? Like, we're talking about the diesel trucks and this and that and the things you need to get coal out at an industrial scale. Who makes those anymore? Is it us? Do we make that stuff? Or is it all, to use the...
You have to relearn it,
example,
basically. Yeah, you have to relearn
rebuild all this stuff.
Well, most industrial equipment is still being made in the United States. All our farming equipment, all that stuff is still made here.
I'm asking because I honestly don't know.
So. I mean, even we talk crap about, like, for example, the automaker industry, right? Yeah, they do globalize parts and they make a bunch of shit in Mexico, right? But Mexico is basically part of the United States when you consider the economic sphere, right?
Not that far. Well, and it's not that far. It's not across an ocean. It's in North America,
right? You buy a Toyota, right? And it's a Japanese car, but your Toyota Tacoma is pretty much either made in Texas or in Mexico, right across the border, right?
So it depends, right? I guess we have to define what we mean by that, right? Like, assembled in the USA, that's a thing. But in terms of the small parts and the mechanics of it, it's built in other parts of the world, right?
Well, no, it's not. It's not. Pretty much Toyota.
You're talking about farm equipment?
No, I'm talking about cars, right? Like Tacomas, right? Like trucks, right? They're pretty much designed.
Oh, Tacomas, okay.
Yeah, they're designed and built by a Japanese company, but it's actually not by the Japanese end of the company. The Japanese will run the business side out of Tokyo, and this is because I've known lots of people that worked for Toyota, right? The entirety of the design and everything comes out of Toyota of America, out of California, and then eventually, I believe, it switched to Texas recently.
So if you're talking about vehicle production, I can give you the numbers right now, because this is one of those things that I sometimes have to bring up with people. United States of America. So this is total vehicle production. So it's looking at commercial vehicles, it's looking at tractors, trucks, everything, in addition to, like, private vehicles, right? So if I actually quickly check the numbers, 12.8 million in the year 2000. That was the peak. Actually, no, 13 million was the peak in 1999. Today's production is 10.6 million. So it's kind of bounced up and down a bit. I think the lowest number it got to was like 8 million, but it's not going to be going back up to that number. China, actually, if we look at Chinese production in the year, let me get this right, in the year 2000 was 2 million vehicles. Today, it is 30 million, and the global production is 93 million. So China makes, out of that 93 million, 30 million. United States makes 10 million. Japan makes 8.9 million. And then everyone else is below that. But that's basically, America does make vehicles. I'm not saying it doesn't, right? But it's a far lower number than before. Right. And you can get some American stuff like Tacoma, like you're saying, but it's a much smaller margin than earlier.
Right. But okay. So the Chinese are producing, domestic level. They're
30 million.
They're a much
30 million for, like, total vehicles. Yeah.
Their population is much higher than the United States, and they are most Chinese products when it comes to, like, manufacturing, like get sold to neighboring countries and developing nations.
This is true.
You know,
Yeah.
while the American products tend to either stay in the United States or get sent to developed countries because they're more expensive, more complex, more high tech. And look, once again,
It depends. Yeah, it depends. Some of them are, but most of them have been surpassed. For example, BYD, which is a Chinese company for electric batteries, the Europeans actually prefer BYD to Tesla, and the reason for that is because the battery technology is better, right?
well,
And the reason
I'm
I
sure.
know this, yeah, and the reason I know this is because we had Malcolm Chayune on our podcast, and he actually talked about this. So the Swedes, actually, the Swedish people, and I think Norway and a couple of these guys, they got together and they're like, well, look, we need to start building our own batteries. We don't want to be dependent on China. Those bad Chinese people are like doing all these bad things to us, right? So for a while, all the Swedish billionaires, they dumped all their money in, right? And it was such a big flop that what ended up happening was they eventually went to the Chinese and they're like, please give us your battery technology so that we know what to do, right? And the Chinese gave them their 30-year-old battery technology, right? And the Swedes got angry. They're like, oh, those bad Chinese people, why are you not sharing your latest battery technology with us? And the Chinese are like, bro, if we do that, that's going to be like us giving you our trade secrets. So we're not interested, right? So whenever like the Twitter, like ethno-nationalist bros tell me that only the white man invents stuff, I always bring up this example because this is the example that really slaps them in the face. So no, like the Chinese make really, really nice batteries. It's not going to last forever. I expect China to peak, stagnate, decline, and fall as well. But in that area, they've already surpassed. And the way you know this is because the Europeans buy their electric stuff and their motors and their batteries from China, not America, right? And they're doing it in larger and larger quantities.
Right.
Now, in other areas, America still has the advantage, right? But it's not going to last for that much longer, basically.
Right, but ultimately here, we're once again we're talking about that top level global economics element, right?
Oh yeah.
Which
Oh yeah.
in a collapse that would be a non-issue because in a collapse type situation, the Swedes wouldn't be buying any fucking batteries from the Chinese. Because,
Oh yeah.
right.
They will not be buying anything.
Right. So what it comes down to, what we're talking about here is multinational corporations playing in a game that is so above and beyond the regular, humans interaction level, right? So yes, on the macroeconomics, right? When you're playing the game where you have to source labor and intellectual, ideas and that type of thing from the entire planet, and you're playing on a global scale, right?
Yes.
These kind of conversations make sense because it does matter. And the reason
Absolutely.
the reason Detroit doesn't make cars in Detroit is because it's expensive and it's economically prohibitive because of our regulations and because of our labor laws and because of our emission laws and all this stuff. So it's much cheaper for Ford to make all their cars in Mexico City at the plant where they can hire basically near slaves to work in the corporations, like in 2666.
That is what they do, yeah.
Right,
That
by
is what
Roberto
they do, yeah.
Boliana, right? It's much cheaper to have some, Taiwanese like bugman that can sit there for 12 hours staring at semiconductors, right? It's cheaper that way. It's cheaper because they can work those guys 20 hours a day. You know what I mean?
The thing with semiconductors, you're correct if we're talking about the lower level people, but it's actually a semi-skilled thing. You actually need quite a bit of acumen in electronics and these other things, right? One of the things the Americans tried to do, I think this was like 10 years ago.
This was a very interesting story. Yeah, I like this one a lot.
Like Arizona. So in Arizona, they're like, okay, well, we're gonna build this plant in Arizona, and because this plant is going to be supervised by like Chinese American citizens and like all this other like people who are intelligent, we'll figure out a way to like manufacture stuff here, right? So the idea was that, okay, well, look, we don't want to rely on Taiwan because Taiwan's going to get annexed by China any moment now. So let's figure this out, right? And it's the same problem. It's like, well, we couldn't figure out the technology, number one. Number two, we can't just go to the Chinese and tell them to give us the technology. And number three, the margin is just not there, right? Like the margin, the labor. I mean, you could be like, hey, bros, we're going to pay you cash only, or we're going to pay you like pennies. Are you willing to work? And, there's jobs you can do this for. Like the entire like illegal migrant thing of like food picking and that kind of stuff. If you're like an agribusiness person, you're never letting go of that sweet deal. Of,
No,
like,
you'd be a dumbass to do that.
Yeah, exactly. But like for semiconductors, you can't do that because to build the things, you actually need to be intelligent, right? And what I mean by that is you need to actually have like higher education and all these other things, and you need to know electronics. Now, I'm not saying all Hispanics are like that, but the number of illegal migrants who are going to be highly educated and whatnot, that's a small number, right? So you can't like use that strategy for like the strategy used for agribusiness. So the Arizona plant flopped. And you're correct, by the way, good sir. I agree with you that the higher level stuff and the lower level stuff, but we have to understand that if there is a situation like that, it is going to not just trickle down, it's going to impact the way in which people live their lives, even at the lower level, right? It's not just you can't buy the bananas, it's also that, hey, yeah, I can get fuel for my, Toyota Corolla or like, I don't know, like my Ford Mustang or whatever, but I can only like drive it sparingly. I need to use and manage my resources more, right? It's going to also be like, okay, well, how many hours of electricity did I use today, right? Oh, the solar water heater's not working. Okay, how much am I going to use it for? And so on and so forth, right? So people are going to change the way they live, but it's not going to be a less rich life. It's just going to be a more like hardy life. And the thing with a dark age, right? What's the definition of a dark age? A dark age is when the prior society in its like achievements in technology, civilization, and so on and so forth is replaced by people who live more a subsistence lifestyle, right? So you saw this with Rome, for example, right? After 476, what happened was like, okay, well, bros, there's the Colosseum here. There's only like 50,000 people, 25,000 people left in the city. Let's all just move into the Colosseum and use that as our walls, right? Because everyone else has either emigrated or they've decided that, hey, maybe we should just join the barbarians or so on and so forth, right? So you're going to see that, right? A dark age means contraction, right? But like you're saying, like contraction doesn't mean bad contraction. It could mean, hey, I'm more muscular rather than being obese and fat. I'm more muscular or I'm more thin or what have you, right? But it is going to be a contraction, right? And
right,
and that's really what I want to get across to people. Yeah.
And I agree with that, right? And here's kind of how I look at it, right? And so I look at it from a whatever, a normie kind of level, right? But we look at the the growth of, let's talk about cars still, right? So we look at the growth of cars, right? Now, your average car right now, like my Toyota Corolla, I believe my Toyota RAV4, which is a middle income car, right? It's an SUV, a very popular one. I think that most people are familiar with the RAV4, right? I believe according to the manual, when I bought it 3-4 years ago, it has something like 12 PC, computer cores, right, in it, right?
Yes.
So the damn thing has more fucking processing power, than the laptop, the $1,000, Microsoft laptop I have sitting in front of me right now, right?
Yes.
Is my Toyota RAV4 better than a 1965, Mustang, right? Is it? Do those processor cores? Okay, so I got a backup cam.
It depends,
right?
It depends.
All right, I have a backup cam, whoop-de-fucking do, and I've got 17 airbags that like explode and kill me if I crash it, right? And then my processor cores beep if I'm not driving straight on the lane, right? But is the advancement, the technological, if processor cores all of a sudden disappeared right now, right? Could I just switch back to driving that Mustang from 1969? Absolutely, right? Why can't why can't Ford make that Mustang from 1969? Is it incapable of doing it? Absolutely not. It's not allowed to make the Mustang from 1969, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is your car, is your Toyota Corolla, or I don't know, what do you drive, Fisto?
I think Fisto is Sir Fisto's AFK for a while. Oh, he's back.
I had hit the audio. Yeah.
Right.
I'm dodging sneezes.
What whip do you drive?
I drive a Nissan Versa.
Okay, your Nissan Versa, right? Which probably has a few processors in it itself, right?
It's actually pretty basic. The one I've got is pretty basic. I've got a backup camera, but I think that's the fanciest fucking thing in it.
Right. I used to drive a 1989 Toyota pickup, right? This thing was white. It was manual. It had no air conditioning. It had no heater in it, no power windows, right? And that thing lasted for 20 fucking years, right? I actually, when I bought it, it had a cracked radiator. I didn't know it had a cracked radiator. The front was kind of bent, but I bought it for $400 off a girlfriend, right? And I drove that thing.
Was kind of
bent. I drove that thing for okay, the headlights were like uneven, like one pointed up, one pointed down and stuff. I drove that thing for near 6 years until one day it just started pouring fluid out at a gas station. I took it in and the guy's like, yeah, you know, your radiator's been cracked for like, I don't know, a decade. And I'm like, no, but it still ran. So he slapped a new radiator. He slapped a new radiator in that thing and the thing was good as new and it's still driving somewhere in Texas right now because I gave it away, right? So ultimately, could Toyota still build that truck? Yes, it can't build it, not because it's incapable of building that truck. It's because government regulation tells Toyota, no, they cannot build the Toyota pickup.
So it's going to take a while, right? Like the men who built the Mustang 1965 or the Toyota pickup, right? The Toyota pickup, more likely you'll be finding those men and you can kind of get them to apprentice a bunch of people. But it comes down to like, okay, well, how does the macro, impact the micro? If there is a credit event, right, bankruptcy or whatever else, right, credit contraction means that people are not going to be able to borrow money. And when I say people, I'm talking about governments, entire governments, right? So the Americans are going to find out very quickly that, hey, China bros and Japan bros, they're not going to be giving us their money anymore, right? So now you have to become more autarkic, right? Like thin, right? And now you're like, okay, well, what do we have? Well, we have all these like empty factories or whatnot, and we can fill them up with people, right? That's going to be the main jobs now. It's going to be like this boom of like manufacturing again, right? But that boom comes with a cost. The cost is that, yes, you get that, but it means that all of the other fancy stuff that people are used to, they're not going to be getting those, right? Like the higher end service sector stuff, right? But once you get the factories up and running, it's still going to take a while. And people are going to be like, okay, well, who remembers how to build the 1965 Mustang? And they're going to be like, okay, well, there's this one old dude who kind of remembers, but he's kind of has dementia. So I don't know if he can like apprentice us. All right. Oh, what about this pickup truck from like the 1990s or what have you? Oh, there's a bunch of people here. We can form a team. And then it's a learning curve, right? You could build it. It can be done, but it's a learning curve. It'll take several years. And by then, what's going to happen is the energy realities are going to be different, in which case people will have a more minimalistic car design. I don't expect the cars of like 2054, 2064, 2074 to be anything like the cars of today, which are like, okay, 12 different computers, and he's got like 10 different cameras and 17 different airbags. I think you're going to see a minimalistic design closer to the 1950s, 1940s, and then it's going to kind of decline from there onwards, right? So,
right, but is that a bad thing?
No, that's the point I tried to make.
No. Right. That's the thing is, I think that for everyone. Right. The reason is that I think that a lot of the progress since the mid 90s is not particularly good. You know what I mean? Look, would the world be would the world be better or worse right now if the internet disappeared? That's a good question to ask, right? So, right, would the world be better off right now if government subsidized soy slop corn farming, that basically fills our supermarkets with poison?
Yeah.
Decide,
that's like all the food.
Yeah, right. All our food,
all the American food. Right, all the American food has like corn in it, basically.
Right, exactly. Mass-produced soy slop food that fills every aisle of the supermarket. If those went away and we had to only get food from around us, would that be a worse world? And my answer is no. So in
Karen
a way,
thinks so. Karen thinks it's going to be a worse world.
Of course she does, but fuck her, right?
Karen can shut the fuck up and get back.
No, Karen doesn't think anything. Karen thinks whatever her husband. No, Karen doesn't think anything. Karen thinks whatever her husband thinks. Okay, there's no opinion.
Go to.
They'll go wherever the truth goes, right? Look, if now, if Hollywood ceased to exist and I don't see another Marvel movie for the next fucking 100 years, I would be happy, okay? Nothing's good coming out of any of those things, right? So a lot of the progress that we are going to lose, I'm happy to lose. So maybe in a way, I'm like, bring on the skinny age, okay? Get to the fucking gym, all right? Give me back my Mustang. Because look at this, okay? You look at Chinese and Indian vehicles, right? So I've spent, unlike a lot of people that comment on this type of issues. I spent a lot of
Sure,
time
sure, sure.
traveling the world, right? So I have seen the great empire of China and their magnificent technological growth, right? I've seen the Chinese. I was in Timor Leste a few years ago, right, which is a
Nice.
small island off the coast of Australia, and I saw the Chinese Corps of Engineers built roads within weeks, right? And then 6 months later, I saw the same roads collapse into the ocean because they built them like shit, right? Like literally in like my 9 months I lived there, right? I saw the Chinese build stuff and it collapsed right away because they basically built it like garbage, right? I've seen that before, right? And I've seen the Chinese and the Indian stuff, right? And it's all low tech like slop for the most part, right? Mass produced, meant for third world countries, right? Which is not a bad thing because you know what?
So it depends, right? Yeah, it depends. Like the Chinese, when they send their engineers out, right? What's that expression Trump uses? They're not sending their best and brightest. Like when you see a guy working in Kenya, and I've been to like Africa all over the place, right? So they don't send their best and brightest. And oftentimes when they do build these things fast, it looks impressive on the outside, but there are issues with it, right? Now, for all our dear listeners and readers, I am biased. I am, my empress is Chinese, and so are my 7 daughters. So I'm going to say nice things about China. But the thing with China, you have to understand, is that you have to, if you're looking for high-tech technology, that kind of stuff, you need to go to their big cities, right?
I have been to the big cities. They drive BMWs.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Look, I've been to China, right? I've been to Beijing. I've been to Hong Kong. Yeah,
absolutely.
I've been to all 3 of the major Chinese, cities that everybody's always talking about. I've been to Beijing, I've been to Hong Kong, and I've been to Taipei, right? So I've covered the gamut of. This was 4 years ago. I was in Hong Kong. 6 years ago, I was in Taipei, and then Beijing was somewhere in between. I had to look at my calendar, right? But here's the thing, right? If you go there, everything is Western, right? All their cars are BMWs and Teslas. I saw more Teslas in Hong Kong than I saw in Los Angeles, right? I saw more Ferraris and Lamborghinis in Hong Kong than I saw in Los Angeles.
They definitely, yes, they definitely buy a lot of Western cars.
They're not driving the Chinese cars over there.
It depends on which neighborhood you go to, but there's definitely people who buy a lot of Western cars. I agree with that. Yeah.
Right. And a big reason is because Chinese vehicles and Indian vehicles. I know, for example, the Indian company owns a Jaguar right now, or a Land Cruiser or whatever, right? For their models at home, right? And even American companies that produce for the East market and that kind of stuff, they don't have to follow the regulations, right? Like, for example, why is it that you can buy a fantastic Toyota Hilux all over Southeast Asia, but you can't buy it in the United States? Strictly, the Hilux is a superior truck than the Tacoma or the Tundra, right? But you can't buy it in the United States because the U.S. government says you can't fucking buy it. Right? Not because it doesn't have the proper safety regulations or whatever. You look at the Land Cruiser, right? You look at the latest models of Land Cruisers sold all over the Southeast Asia, right? I was in Papua New Guinea and I drove a Land Cruiser manual stick. It was a fantastic car, right? Total piece of shit, like Death Trap, right? But it was and a new one sold for like $5,000 if you wanted one, right? Well, finally, Toyota has released this Land Cruiser back into the States, and you know how much it costs? $80,000 for a model, right? Because it has Mickey Mouse bullshit like backup cameras and all this stuff, and tons of idiotic regulations put on it. It's twice the size of the Land Cruiser you buy in Asia, and it's ugly as fuck, right? And it's super expensive. And I guarantee you that car can be produced for about $10,000, but because of regulation, taxation, and all this stuff, it costs $80,000 because it makes people rich to have all these regulations and stuff tossed onto it, right?
I mean, if you live in an empire, there's always going to be a class of people that do nothing all day and get money for doing nothing, right? So this is basically where the regulations come in, right?
Right. We need to trim the fat of those kind of regulatory powers, and that will really release the economic potentiality of the West in the way it was in the past. And that's why
it's going to be released. Yeah. It's going to be released. I agree with you. But when it does get released, people are going to have a different outlook of life, right? Like one of the things with credit contraction events, and if I'm correct about the rate at which the credit contraction is going to happen with the bankruptcy, you're going to get the release, but it's going to be a society where, like the abundance industrialism, not just in America, but across the world, is going to die down. And everyone's like, okay, guys, we don't live in a globalized economy anymore. We just went tits up bankrupt. We can't borrow money anymore. We got this nice economic release. this is amazing. We need to now use our resources intelligently, right?
Right.
And you're going to see like nationalism, populism, these things especially make a roaring comeback, not just in America, but in other parts of the world because of this understanding that, yeah, we got this nice release, but we need to use it. We need to manage it properly, right? Because like if we don't, right, we're going to basically run out, right? And I think the Americans, for like people like to criticize America, but America has farmland. America has all these other things going for it. America's going to do fine. Like other parts of the world, there's going to be some interesting things happen, which let's just say is going to be a far more like bleak and doomy for them, basically.
Right. I mean, to even mention the credit issue, right? Fisto being an American, you could probably back me up. You're a natural born American. Your family's probably been in the United States longer than I guarantee you've been here longer.
1638, sir.
Right.
1638.
There we go.
I'm a 1991 American. Okay, that's
Get
when
the fuck out.
I'm sorry. I will, bro. I'm leaving.
It's fine. You're welcome, sir. You're welcome. You're welcome.
But here's the thing, right? Like you look at the way we do mortgages and housing lending and that type of thing, right? Mm-hmm. Up until the 90s, the United States was not such a heavy credit reliant, country, and you could buy a house, cash basically back in the 50s. Like Fisto's grandpa probably bought a house, with his annual payments, right? And then
came back from the war, bought a house.
Right. Came back from the war, bought a house, right? But now the same house he bought for like 10 grand, which is the buying power of like, a year's worth of saving basically for a house, cost $1 million in Los Angeles. And honestly, if you go to Los Angeles, if you go to the suburbs of Los Angeles, like cities like Long Beach and stuff, a lot of those houses were built post-war. They were built for retiring Navy people and Marines and stuff coming from the war. They're even selling some old base housing from World War II, right? And these houses that were basically built by the military to house like GIs coming home, go for $1 to $2 million or more in some areas, right? Which is fucking absurd. I saw a real estate agency selling a house for $2 million, like a 2-bedroom house on 10th Street in Long Beach, which is in the fucking ghetto. If it was like where like Snoop Dogg was shooting guns at each other back in the 90s, but now it's selling for $2 million. So this whole thing is an artificial creation of the banking companies, right? The whole idea of loans that you owe for 80 years of your life forever that are 50% taxes, right? That is just pure fat. It's pure government and corporate fat that's tossed onto these things, right? Because you can build right now in the United States, there are skills we have the skills to be able to build a house, right? And we can build a house, right? I can fucking probably build a house if I YouTube enough videos, right?
Nice.
And we have the materials because I'm surrounded by fucking trees, right? And rocks and stuff, right? And Adobe if you live in the West, right? You can build all that stuff, right? But you can't because the government won't let you. You know what I mean? And you can't sell the house cash its actual value. You have to go through.
The good news is in a dark age, the society is going to be patchworks of feudal fiefdoms. So you will be able to build a house, good sir.
Right.
And your descendants will be able to as well. It's just that it's going to be like a very, very interesting world where like people work with their hands again and like, exchange is more local again and what have you, right? But the thing with regulation, you're talking about regulation. The thing is, it's always a matter of like, it's just inevitability that like when empires get big enough, their credit and the way in which the money flows around, it becomes less and less efficient to the point where the debt makes things impossible. Like Japan has a debt to GDP ratio of like 250, 280%. You barely can do nothing in Tokyo. Like if you're in Tokyo and you're like, I want zoning to do this, or, I want to set up a small business in my 500 square foot apartment. There's so much stuff that's going to be in front of you, whether it's red tape, whether it's like basic energy realities and so on and so forth. You won't be able to get anything done.
Have you lived in Tokyo?
Once upon a time, I went to Japan, but I did not go to Tokyo. I went to Kyoto.
Okay, I lived 5 years in Tokyo, right?
Yes.
And in Tokyo, it's interesting because you're right. They do have a lot of high regulation, but they also
Yes.
have some smarter regulation. So in Tokyo,
Mhm.
in Japan, if you live, first of all, housing is very affordable in Japan, right? They only pay cash for houses, so you have to pay the entirety of
Yes.
your
Yes. Yes.
your
Yes.
you can actually save up money. A Japanese person can save up money and buy a house, which is something you cannot do in the United States, right?
Yes.
You
yes.
have to buy, only Japanese citizens can buy houses. Like I had a friend
That's correct. That's
that
correct.
had to become he ended up marrying his Japanese wife, and then he could not buy a house in his name until he became a Japanese resident initially. And in order to do so,
yeah.
he had to actually learn Japanese and prove that he can speak Japanese. And
Yes,
this is
yes, yes.
this
They
is a
have
guy
that
that
system.
yeah, this is a guy that was married and had a child with a Japanese citizen, right? But either way, so he had to. I remember I had to give him a ride to the bank because he had to literally withdraw in cash the entirety of the down payment on this house, right? But their regulations for a lot of things like construction are so much better than the United States. I remember I was living in a suburb of Tokyo, and I remember one day I was leaving my house with my wife, and we looked at a sign. There was a sign in Japanese, and the sign said, we're doing road construction. And now both my wife and I are from California, so road construction means 10 years. Right? I mean, we're talking about 10 years. Like, there's potholes in roads that they started building when I was a teenager that are still being built right now, or haven't been filled in, right, in California because of regulatory stupidity and just government,
Well, we also have to remember something. Japan, as an island nation, it is heavily connected by the high-speed rail or whatnot, right? So infrastructure-wise, it doesn't have the same issue America does, which is like a giant country where like everything has to be transported by trucks and cars and what have you, right? So America, by design, had to develop a more bureaucratic system to deal with that, whereas Japan is a cleaner country.
You're absolutely right, but let's not forget that Japan is not a small country at all. If you were to superimpose Japan upon the map of the United States, the northern tip of Japan would be in Canada, and the southern tip of Japan would be in Mexico. So a lot of people always like misunderstand the size of Japan. It's not a tiny little island nation.
America,
absolutely. It's bigger in a different way.
Yeah,
it's bigger in a different way. It's bigger in a different way. But like America is a giant compared to Japan,
right?
Basically.
It is right. So my fear was, fuck, man. Now I've got the next 5 years to deal with this like construction in my neighborhood. I have to go around. So the next day I go to, I'm like, okay, let me go check out this construction. They're fixing this road or whatever. And it's done. They did it overnight.
Nice.
They fixed the freaking road overnight, in my neighborhood.
Nice.
So in Japan, it's interesting. There's a little bit of a Bugman quality to it, but they sell, so they don't really sell individual houses. What they do is they sell the land plot itself, and then you buy the house on top of that, right? And a lot of their modern houses are interchangeable Lego pieces, right? You'll go to Tokyo and you'll go to a neighborhood in Tokyo, and they have these like show lots, kind of like how you have the Tesla lot where you like see the cars but you don't actually buy the car, right? And they have like 7 to 10 models of houses you have, right? And these houses are made of this weird like plastic kind of material type of thing, right? And these dudes will come in and they'll take the lot, they'll tear down the house you just bought, right? They'll tear it all down and they'll put a brand new house up within months. Like I'm talking about like weeks, right? And you have a 2-story townhome built fresh from scratch with every modern amenity you have, right? So there's a lot of they do a lot of things. Yes, they're very sclerotic in a lot of like, try to register a car in Japan. That takes fucking ever, But, their fees are like $20 compared to the $600 annually that we pay here in the United States. So there's like, their insurance, for example, you only pay if you crash your car. You don't pay annually just to, or some dumb taxes like that, right? They do have a lot of problems with like their gas prices. Their gas prices are horrible. And they also, for example, they disencourage driving. So a lot of their highways, like what we compare them to, like our freeways in the United States, are toll roads. So all their roads are basically toll roads. So if you were to live in like the suburbs of Tokyo, like in Yokohama, for example, which is the one city south of Tokyo, it's like the port city, to go from Yokohama to Tokyo by car, it would cost you like $40, right? On toll roads, or you can hop in a train for 15 minutes and it costs you $1.50, right, in equivalent. And they tend to match their money to the United States, so the prices are very similar. But Go ahead.
Yeah, no, Japan. Oh, no worries, no worries. No, like the you were talking about the oil and the gas prices. Like Japan, I think they import like about 3 million barrels of oil daily, right? That's kind of like the general number. And I think America's number is like 6 million or something, a slightly higher than that. It's increasing, but it's slightly higher than that. But compared to the fact that America has tripled the population and Japan is like, only one third of that, right? It makes sense that their gas prices are like that. And it's going to get worse. Like you're going to see not just Japan, but I think the Europeans are already doing this. They're like, okay, well, don't drive your car. Instead, bike to work, or I don't know, use an electric scooter or whatever, right? You're going to see more of that happen as it becomes clear to everyone that this big globalized economy, this higher structure that we relied on, where like the ships came with the oil and then the coal and the natural gas or what have you, and then we used that energy and whatnot, which was like, fossil fuels have three qualities to them. They're like fungible, they are, concentrated, and they are, what's the last one? Fungible, concentrated, and I'm having like a brain fart here. Fungible, concentrated, and abundant. Yes,
Right,
that's the
right.
word. But no, like you're not gonna have that world. You're not gonna have that world in a few years and decades. You're already seeing the transition happening in many of these places, such as the European states, right? But like now that you tell me about Japan and the gas prices, I was reminded rather of that yes, they have that issue as well.
Right. Well, so what? Okay, so I'm gonna have one more point on this topic, and I'm gonna probably I want to kind of shift it just a little bit, right? And this has been
Go for it, go for it, go for it.
fantastic conversation, man. This is probably one
No
of the
worries,
best
no
ones
worries.
we've had on this podcast. Now, so when we okay, one thing, and this is not an attack on you, but this is
Go for it, go for it, go for it.
an attack on the more doomerist kind of end of the world type of mindset that a lot of people. Yes,
Oh, I don't believe in the end of the world. I don't, just in case, there's different types of doomers. I believe in the thesis of long decline. So my view is that the peak for industrial society has been reached. And for the next several centuries and millennia, we're going to slowly decline and bottom out, and then we're going to rise again, basically, all across
Yeah.
the world. But that's
You know
going to
what?
take a couple millennia. I don't believe in this like apocalyptic fantasy, but go ahead, good sir.
No, I think you and I are fully in agreement that I think where we disagree is how it's going to look like,
Long-term
Gotcha.
optimists.
Yeah, I think you and I are both on the same point.
Yeah.
Like I've always said, historically
I'm there
speaking,
with you guys.
I think historically speaking that we're not looking at the collapse of Rome and the European Dark Ages. We're looking at the slow decline of Venice. The Republic of Venice is what we're at right now. But one thing that a lot of the more doomers, right, always leave out, right? They always leave out human agency, right? And
Yes.
they leave out the idea that, like, yes, when things decline, sometimes when adversity comes, it brings out the best in people, right?
That's true.
We always, and that's a factor that we can never, in our prediction models, we can never predict. Like you look at, like, for example, the Soviet Union at its worst, most oppressive, or Eastern Europe at its most oppressive. When thinking heads put on their thinking caps in the West and look at these places and they go blah 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 and everything's poor, you always talk about people, whether it's the Romanians or the Polish or whatever, as a bunch of non-agency having peasants that just stand in line waiting for the milk, right? But that's not the fucking case, right? Adversity breeds, creativity. Adversity breeds people that create black markets and people that come up with ideas and they solve solutions, right? One of the West's greatest achievement, in my opinion, and this is as a Western chauvinist, right, is the fact that, like, you know what? It was during, for example, the Dust Bowl and the economic collapse of the United States in the 20th century, that some of the most interesting and intelligent people sprung forth with solutions. It's during the worst times that we have the best people step up, right? So a lot of the doomer and gloomerism takes a zero. It doesn't even factor in the ingenuity of actual individual people, because we never know.
Sure.
You're right. We might all collapse back to some like medieval dark age kind of situation. But what about the Elon Musk?
By the
right?
way, it's not overnight. It's not overnight.
Right.
I'm not saying it's going to happen overnight. It's going to happen over several decades and centuries.
All right. But you see what I mean? I think that we need to factor in the human ingenuity. And that comes to my next point, which is, let's talk about America or the West, right? Because your projects are
Just a quick thing. Thank you for bringing up human ingenuity, because I think it's an important point. I don't discount human ingenuity. What I say is, if you're a chef and you have a bunch of ingredients, right? Like sometimes you see these cooking shows, right? and they're like, oh shit, we don't have this ingredient anymore, or it got wasted, or we couldn't buy it. Yeah, there's human ingenuity. You're going to cook something nice, but ultimately it comes down to your ingredients, right? Yes, you can do a lot of nice things, but if you don't have the ingredients to cook with, I'm sorry, bros, but like if you don't have the steak, you could probably make something nice with like mushrooms or whatever, but it's not going to be steak, right? So that's what I try to tell people. I don't discount human ingenuity. I agree with you, good sir. It's more that you have to be realistic about what you have with you, basically.
Oh, right. But remember
Quick question, guys.
Remember real fast on the chef thing. Remember the best
Okay.
food is ethnic peasant food, right? Whether it's borscht from Russia or
Nice,
tacos from Mexico, ultimately, some of the best food comes out of poverty.
That's true. That's
Go
true.
ahead, Fisto.
One thing I'd like to talk just a little bit more before we move past human ingenuity is, as I hear you guys speaking, I keep thinking to myself, at what point does human ingenuity really begin to pick up and really begin to make an impact? And I guess the best way I can think of it is like in a situation like we have, you're going to have more and more people stop asking permission and start asking forgiveness, and then eventually they're going to realize there's nobody to get forgiveness from. Like the empire runs out of steam, and all the laws in the world, all the regulations can be on the books that you want, but you can't do jack about it. So
It's happening right now. It's happening like in Mexico. In Mexico, the
Okay.
cartels literally run their fiefdoms
Yeah.
now. Like there was a
Yeah.
mayor that got elected a few weeks ago, and I brought it up in Substack, but he got beheaded, right, by the cartels like 3 days after he was elected, and they left his head on top of his car hood, and then and this is going to happen more and more. You're going to see people realize that the world is my oyster. I got my merry posse of boys. We got our motorbikes and pickup trucks. And these guys, yeah, they might have some high-tech weaponry, but they can never deploy enough men to get all of us, right? So we can just grab the place by force. And you're going to see more and more of that happening in the coming years and decades.
Which is a good thing. I mean, that's what America was built by, right? A bunch of guys grabbing their posse of boys, whether it was in 1776 or, New York in the early 20th century, right? It was built
Man's nature is to conquer. Yeah,
Right.
man's nature is to conquer. And it's gonna come back in a big way, absolutely.
Right. The best, the best of everything was built by those kind of guys, right? But,
yeah,
and
I feel the attitude that somehow, the purely materialistic idea that like somehow that human spirit to conquest is never going to come back is like, man, you are in for a big.
It's the
fucking
dumbest crap I've
surprise.
Oh,
ever heard.
right.
That's kind of like if Sir Kenaz if Sir
gonna have-
Kenaz was on this show.
Yeah,
No,
he'd be
Sir
flipping out.
Fisto. If absolutely, like Sir Fisto,
Yeah.
if Sir Kenaz was on this show, I'd be like, Sir Kenaz, pull up the soundtracks, and then he'd be like playing the Mortal Kombat soundtrack of like Shang Tsung,
Oh, yeah.
going, "That was pathetic."
Yeah, that's how you end up with your head on the hood of your own car.
Oh yeah.
So
Okay.
ultimately, NF, your Substack project, your writing and your podcasting ultimately focuses on the West, right? So that's why I'm going to mostly talk about the West, right?
No worries.
So one thing that is, I would say, yes, our economic power has, defined the West in the late 20th, 21st century. But more importantly, so in my opinion, is our cultural power, right?
That's true.
The United States not only dominates the entire planet economically, it dominates the entire planet culturally. For example, I've been around the world, right? And I've had Starbucks in every single world. I have we're all Karens sometimes, right? And one of the, how there's, I make fun of those, we all make fun of those guys with their, what do you call it? Their Funko Pops, right? Well, I have my own version of Funko Pop. And one thing I've always done is I buy the stupid "You Were Here" mugs from Starbucks. You know what I mean? Right? So right now,
those ones, yes.
Yeah,
yes.
right now I'm drinking out of a Orlando, Florida mug in honor of Fisto, right?
Nice.
But I've got one sitting on my desk, right, from Kuching, Malaysia, right? Have you ever heard of Kuching, Malaysia?
I have not been there, sadly. I've been to Malaysia, but I've not been to that part.
Have you heard of Kuching before, Fisto?
I have not. No.
Exactly. Nobody's fucking heard of Kuching, Malaysia, right? So the fact that I walked into a fucking Starbucks in the middle of Borneo, where 50 years ago they were still headhunters and cannibals, right? And I drank a goddamn Starbucks and I got a Kuching, Malaysia, right, cup, shows that America is number fucking one, right? And I can have the same Starbucks, right?
So it's an interesting point. It's an interesting point. I hear this argument. I actually tend to agree with you in the sense of the cultural thing, but in terms of the economic thing, the 26 trillion or whatever fake and gay GDP number people come up with, 80% of it is like services, right? Like
Right.
if you check like, okay, who makes all of the world's steel, aluminum, and all these other things? It's basically China, and then everyone else is like a distant second and third, right?
Right. No,
Like
I feel
China today, like China today makes more than half the world's steel, right? And in terms of like raw volume from the year 2000 to the year 2008, so the first 8 to 9 years of the 21st century, China used more concrete, steel, aluminum, and what have you than America used in the entirety of the 20th century. But you're absolutely correct that the cultural power is still there. And, people like to talk about multipolar world and this kind of stuff. I always tell them the same thing. I'm like, look, the cultural power of the English language, of America and these things, it's going to stay for quite some time. And in terms of like these other things you're talking about, multipolarity and that kind of stuff, bro, that's just like a synonym for great power conflict. Like what you're selling me is great power conflict, right? And look, I'm a realist with regard to foreign policy. I do expect great power conflict, but like it's not going to be like this kumbaya world of like Russia and China gets along forever and ever and they live happily ever after. No, like after they deal with America, they're going to be like, oh, you and me, we actually don't see eye to eye on most issues, right? Let's fight after 5 decades, right? So that's the nature of the world, right? You're going to have nation states, civilization states, whatever, right? You're going to see them decline and fall, plateau and stagnate, right? America simply is, on the decline phase, right? But you're going to see this happen to China as well. You're going to see this happen to Russia as well. I don't expect, 1,000 years from now, do I think any of these guys will be around? No, I don't. I expect most of the world to be filled with like these local communities of people. You're going to have a couple of these like nomadic war bands. You're going to have a couple of these cannibals. You're going to have all kinds of people basically all around the world, right?
Right, but see what I'm saying is though, right, is that I completely on a non-economic, non-military, we're talking just cultural level, right?
Power.
The United States still dominates. Well, in the United States is
100%.
just an extension
100%.
of I would say the greater West, right? The greater Western project, right? It's a peak, but I would say that the West itself has multiple heads, right? And once again,
I would say, there's multiple heads. You're correct, but I would say that Europe is right now basically a vassal of America. I mean, I'm sorry to say this, but they don't have any real independence.
Absolutely, right?
Yeah.
But look, okay, for example, right now, right? Let's discount China, for example, right?
Sure.
If we had a civilizational battle, cultural battle between the Russians and the United States, and the Russians came
America would win.
Hypothetically speaking, let's say the Russians win, right? We'd still be reading Dostoevsky and listening to Tchaikovsky, right? Which are Western cultural elements, because the Russians are still the West, right? Yes, they have some Eastern elements to them, but ultimately, their cultural products, whether it's ballet, whether it's film, right? Because Russian movies are all very popular in the United States, right? Whether it's still Western products, right? Nothing, if the Chinese were to come on top, what products, what cultural elements would the Chinese or any other non-Western nation dominate the overall global mindscape? And that's what I'm interested in. A lot of people don't mention this stuff.
I don't think the Chinese want to do that, though. I don't think the Chinese want everyone else to be like, hey, let's look at the 4 great classical tales, or let's study this, or let's study that, right? I don't think they're interested in that. And I think like the English-speaking world of like the British Empire once upon a time, and then America later on, they were interested in that, right? But like in terms of like, does Russia want Russian culture to spread to every corner of the world? I don't think so, right? They do have cultural forms, like you were talking about ballet. Yeah, like what did Spengler say? Petronism, right? Petronism is still alive and well, right? But in terms of a couple of these other more traditional forms, whether it's Russia's unique form of Orthodox Christianity and so on and so forth, you might see a little bit of that blossom here and there, but nowhere near the level. Like we have to understand. Like we had what's his name? Professor Alexander Wolfeze on, I think on yesterday's episode, and he made this point that you've got the three A's: air conditioner, automobile, and airplane, right? The two A's, automobile and airplane, especially the airplane, because of that, right? American ideas spread to everywhere, right? Whether it's the cultural stuff of like songs and dance, or whether it's like the food and so on and so forth. And for a while, that's going to last, right? For a while, that's going to last. But again, I do not expect it to be there 1,000 years from now. That being said, does that mean that, oh, it's a lesser form, or is it? No, I don't. I think it's a very, very big achievement, right? I'm not one of these people who's like, oh, the West never achieved that. That's bullshit. Obviously, the West has achieved lots of things, right? But it's not a linear achievement, right? You're at the top of the bell curve, and it's downhill from here, basically, right? So, and that's maybe the doomer in me speaking, but that's what I see in the future. I see localization. I don't see the Chinese going, hey guys, we are now the new soft power, and you have to now emulate our cultural and moral and ethical norms, and listen to our songs and our stuff and what have you. I don't think they're interested in that. And I don't think that in the 21st century you're going to have much of that, right? It's going to basically decline from now onward.
Well, ultimately, and this is where I want to preface this, because you did mention you did mention that you are married to a Chinese woman, right? I actually am kind of a cinephile when it comes to things like I lived in Japan, but I've always been into China, right? I find Chinese culture, and I find a lot of their history fascinating, and I went to China. I went to Hong Kong because I truly like and understand that culture. Hong Kong specifically, even though Hong Kong is not truly Chinese, right? You can argue that Hong Kong is really a British.
Hong Kong is a pseudomorphism. Hong Kong has a pseudomorphism with like the British elements in it. Yes.
Right. I mean, Hong Kong was built by the British, no matter what the Chinese say, just because they were laborers. Hong Kong was fully built by the British. And to this day, it still has streets and everything. And the majority of the wealth is controlled by Eurasians as opposed to actual Han Chinese. But interestingly enough, right? Well, one thing is there's a feeling in me that China, in its growth, is not growing on an independent track. It's getting really good at becoming America, right? It's becoming really good at becoming, it's in the 50s and 60s or maybe 70s or 80s stage of American growth right now, right?
I'll slightly disagree. I'll slightly disagree in the following sense. I agree with you that materialistically, they're emulating America from the 1950s and 60s in many ways. But whether it's the cultural values or what have you, which are underlying the materialism, it's very, very different. China's been around for 5,000 plus years. And, in terms of like 1,000 years from now, are they going to be around? Perhaps, perhaps not. But China, the thing with China is that China does not see a contradiction in the way it interacts with the world. Like, one of the things you'll notice about Chinese dynasties is that they start when the Chinese get invaded, right? They get either completely conquered or subjugated or what have you. And then a few decades later, they emulate the forms of the invader, right? But the invader gets swallowed up in the process. I'll give you an example of that. The Qing dynasty, right? The Qing dynasty, the ruling class is Manchu, right? Manchu and these like Jurchen tribes from the northeast, right? So these guys come in, right? They are shamanists, they're Tengriists or what have you, right? So they conquer the place. And the Chinese basically, they start emulating them in dress. Obviously, you've got the pigtail. You've got all these other like customs and whatnot. But then 100 years from now, nobody speaks the Manchu language, right? Like barely anybody. Like a bunch of maybe elites in the imperial city do, right? But that's what China does. And China sees no contradiction to that. China's like, okay, well, we'll emulate America while America's on top, and then we'll swallow America. That's basically like that's like the I'm not saying people believe this. I'm saying that as a civilizational force, as an impersonal civilizational force, this is how China behaves. China behaves in an assimilationist fashion, right? And they don't view that as a weakness; they view that as a strength, if that makes sense.
No, I fully agree, right? And that is the historical element of China. And there's a feeling in me that China is going to swallow the globalist American cultural pill, which they've already done, and you can see it everywhere in China where it's very advanced, right? And I don't think that as a culture they're prepared to deal with the the negativity
Oh, nobody is.
that comes with what we have right now.
It's not just them. It's not just them. It's nobody is like it's not just Chinese people and Russian people, right? Nobody around the world is prepared to talk about degrowth, right? Their idea is, well, if we just swallow this pill of like globalism, global economy, and that kind of stuff, like right now, what they believe in is, look, we just have to make a better multipolar, rules-based, equitable world order, and then we can have this interconnectivity. Bro, that stuff's not coming back, right? Like, you're not going to have a world like that anymore, like with the scarcity coming in. So when you swallow that pill of like, let's make a better world, it's not going to happen, right? And it's not just China. It's going to be Russia. It's going to be everyone else, right? They've not come to the realization yet that, this thing that you're talking about, it is unfortunately an optimistic fantasy.
Right.
It just to clarify, it sounds like we're saying China is not going to be able to pull off what the United States did at the end of World War II to create this.
I mean, they already have. If we're talking about the material aspect, like in the first 8 years of the 21st century, they built like by volume, right?
Yeah.
Now, if you're talking about the cultural aspect, no, right? I don't think that they can pull that off, and they're not interested in it, right? They're not in like China is not interested. Well, they don't view the world that way. Like this is where like Spengler's notion of the difference. Why are they not? So Spengler talked about. Okay, I'll give my theory. I'll start with Spengler, then I'll give my own theory. Spengler started off with like examining the 8 big civilizations of man that have ever existed. Right, Faustian civilization is number 8. Number 7 is Magian. I think China is like number 2 or number 3. But one of the things with Chinese civilization is that Chinese civilization is all about nature and finding balance and equilibrium in the natural world around you. And so this is why when you see the big 3 Chinese philosophies, whether it's Taoism, whether it's Confucianism, whether it's the Chinese forms of Buddhism, it's always about finding harmony in the world around you, right? So in that sense, actually, Chinese civilization, at least compared to the other guys, is more ecologically intelligent compared to the other 7 civilizations. But one of the weaknesses of that worldview is that you are never going to view your culture, society, civilization as something that you should supplant or transplant onto someone else, right? Now, some people might say that's a good thing.
It's about harmony.
Right? Exactly. It's about harmony. Because like if you bring a frog, let's say you bring a frog to Australia that didn't exist back then, right? Like the frog's just going to kill everything because it's got no competitors, right? So China kind of views culture, society, civilization in that like harmonious fashion of like, all right, things should be in their proper places and let's not move things from their proper places, right? Chinese culture, Chinese society, whatever, it belongs over here in the Middle Kingdom. Over there, we might have blatches of it or, splashes of it here and there, but we're not interested in that stuff. Now, Faustianism, right? The Faustian West has a very different way of looking at the world, right? You have limitless expansion from a narrow point or what have you, right? You're trying to go into the starry sky. You're building these Gothic cathedrals. You're doing all this other stuff, right? You view the world very differently, right? Like what was that expression people used to use? Like white man's burden, right? That, people back then didn't view that necessarily as a negative thing. They viewed that as a calling, right? As a civilizational calling, right? And so like in terms of what my own theory is that right now, Chinese society, civilization, what have you, there is a pseudomorphism of this like Faustianness onto them, right? But it's not going to last because again, like Faustian civilization as we know it is being exhausted, right? It's being exhausted by basically it's got hegemony over the world, but whether it's the resource scarcity, whether it's the demographic issues or what have you, right? It's an exhausted society, right? So I think Chinese civilization, like Sir Alexander was saying, yeah, it's going to try and swallow the pill, but it's not just them. Other people are going to try and swallow it, and they're simply going to fail, right? Because there isn't going to be a global civilization of humanity for a long time, right? It's going to take a long time to get back to this level of like living standards or what have you, especially now that the phases of decline and fall have begun.
Right. So, the Chinese growth miracle, really all of Southeast Asia's growth miracle, it was a miracle that wasn't fully organic, right? It was a
pseudomorphism. Was pseudomorphism.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was a growth, and China is able to grow because the United States exists, right? They're able to enjoy the free trade and the free navigation of the oceans.
It's a symbiotic relationship.
Right.
Yeah, it's a basically once upon a time when China was poor, it's like, well, we've got cheap labor and you guys have buyers, right? And now they have, China today has like 850 million people in their middle class. And even if, things go sour with America, they'll still do fine. But once upon a time, if you're talking about the 1950s and 60s, if America and the economy and these other things did not exist, no, China would not. And, they don't view that as a bad thing. Like, from their worldview, it's like, okay, well, we're going to find harmony and equilibrium. And in finding that, we're basically going to assimilate you, right? So, again, it's a very different way of looking at the world. The Chinese soul is very different from the Faustian soul. And they don't view that as a sign of weakness. Like I said, they view it as a sign of strength, that we are going to assimilate you via our harmony and whatnot, right? And in many ways, actually, I would argue that even though Chinese soft power is nothing compared to American soft power on the grand scale of things, there is a lot of Chinese soft power that's beginning to trickle into at least the elite and intelligentsia classes of the United States, especially like this cyclical way of looking at the world, right? The Chinese and the Indians came up with this, right? It's not like Westerners who came up with this. Like, people like to talk about Edward Gibbon, and okay, Edward Gibbon and Polybius earlier than him. Well, the Chinese and the Indians figured this out a lot longer than them, right? Like, cyclicality, like, Faustian man does not view the world in cycles and plateaus. Faustian man views the world in terms of like, okay, we're gonna get to the post-human, transhuman future of like space travel or whatever, number one, or number two, we're all gonna die in nuclear hellfire. That's really the only two ways Westerners, unfortunately, right, the majority of them look at the world nowadays.
The question is though, does the current Chinese economic upper class, right? Are
Yes,
they
yes, yes.
are they Chinese thinking or are they Western thinking? Because what it does seem is that so much of the Chinese success was really just adapting and adopting Western thought. You know, whether it's from material mindset, it seems to me that ultimately, whether you believe in Confucianism, Taoism or whatever, Christianity, all
Sure,
cultures,
sure.
all cultures bend the knee to capital, right? And ultimately, your peasants your peasants want the Marvel and the blue jeans, right? And if the United States was to magically disappear tomorrow, right, and the Pacific Ocean became it no longer had free navigation, right?
It'll
Gotcha,
disappear
gotcha.
Tuesday. It'll disappear Tuesday.
It'd disappear
So,
Tuesday, right?
Yeah,
If
one more day.
Yeah,
Oh my gosh.
if all freedom of navigation. If all freedom of navigation was completely removed tomorrow, right, out of the Pacific Ocean, right, which the Chinese do not maintain, the Chinese live off of the American freedom of navigation, like power, right, and all of a sudden, all those Bodak-as little countries became ridden by pirates.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So apologies for interrupting, Sir Alexandru. But in terms of like, what do the Chinese elite think? Wang Huning, who's on the Politburo, right? Sometimes he's called the Gray Eminence, right? Like, people call him the brains behind the Communist Party, right? He's basically the guy who writes all the formal documents. He's got a great book. It's called America Against America, where he kind of like predicts, like, here's what's going to happen in America in a couple of decades from now. He wrote the book in 1980. But what he said was that China basically has, modern day China, the People's Republic of China, has four main ideologies. Number one is Confucianism. Number two is Marxist-Leninism. Number three is Maoism, right? And number four is Xi Jinping thought, right? Now, in terms of like, okay, well, do they adapt Western ideas of capital, Western ideas of yeah, absolutely, they do. They are basically Marxist in their own orientation. They do still bend the knee to capital. Like, Marxists are fundamentally, they're materialists, right? They view the world in the material lens, right? But they also view the world through that Confucian lens of like harmony or what have you. And they also, factor in Xi Jinping thought, which is like a new, more like traditionalist form of like Marxist philosophy and whatnot. So does China adopt Western? Absolutely, yeah, they do, right? Again, it's a feature, not a bug. It's a feature, not a bug of the Chinese man's soul, right? So, it's not like a soul which is like, okay, well, we are independent from these guys, therefore we're superior. But no, that's not the way. The way they look at it is, yeah, we are dependent. We are symbiotic, but I go for harmony, and in pursuing that harmony and in assimilating him, eventually he and me will become the same, basically. If
Right.
that makes sense.
But see, their neighbors don't feel that way, right?
Oh
The,
yeah, oh
the,
yeah,
the
oh yeah.
South Koreans don't want anything
Vietnam
to do with them.
especially. Vietnam especially.
The Vietnamese want nothing to do with them. The Japanese want nothing to do with them. And last time
You
in
will all
history,
be assimilated.
right?
You will all be assimilated.
Last time in history, when the Chinese adopted Western thought, they adopted the opium pipe, you know, and then 100 years later, they adopted the other opium pipe, which was Marxism, right? And now it seems that they're adopting neoliberalism, where they're adopting BMWs and Marvel movies, right? So I'm not too impressed by the Chinese adaptation of Western stuff, because ultimately, the richer they get, the fatter they'll be, and they'll just turn into a crappier version
Maybe
of the
is
United
that-
States.
Is that the flaw?
It's not.
Is that- well,
Yeah, go ahead, sir.
hold on. Is that the flaw in the Chinese soul where they're not picky enough?
They need to
They're
be
not
picky. They need to
certain
say no to the opium pipe, and they need to say no to the Marvel, because it doesn't matter if they become rich and wealthy if they adopt everything, you know. Because with money comes the global homo, and nobody can resist that. Not even the Chinese, because you know what? The people that couldn't resist the pipe are not going to resist global homo. Sorry to say, you know, unless they adopt it, you know.
We have to, absolutely. So, a quick history. So, when the Qing dynasty took over, actually, from about the early 1600s to about 1765, they did not lose a single war. Now, when I tell this to people, they actually get shocked. They're like, "What do you mean? I thought the Chinese can't fight." So the thing is, right? The Qing dynasty, right? The Qianlong emperor, who ruled for about 61 years or so, he actually undertook something called the 10 Great Campaigns, right? And if you go to China, you can actually study. These are like exceptional military campaigns. Some Western universities teach this stuff, but not that much. But the thing that happened was in 1765, he launched an invasion of Burma, right? And if you want to study attrition warfare and guerrilla warfare, that's what you study, right? 1765 was the first invasion, 1766 the second one, and then I think the third one was 1768, and then 1769. Anyway, why am I bringing this up? When the society went bankrupt from those 4 failed invasions, that was their first ever loss in a war, right? And as the dynasty at that time, who had been undefeated for like well over a century and a half, right? The corruption levels and all this other stuff, like the eunuchs were like, okay, well, this place is fucked. We're gonna, we've lost the mandate of heaven. We're all gonna die. Oh, let me just engage in corruption and filth, right? And so this is where the opium imports from like Europe, Britain, and all these other places started happening. And by the time you get to like 1820, 1830, when the opium wars start happening, right, Britain was actually dealing with a society that had already more or less partially collapsed, right? It was just that out of inertia, it was still going forward, right? Now, is that going to happen to China in the future? It possibly, right? It could be that, materialism and all these other things, they are unable to eschew these things, right? That being said, as the doomer in residence over here, what I will say is that industrial society as we know it is coming to an end, right? So if the Chinese do get hooked on it, it's going to be like a temporary addiction, simply because, again, we're in 2024. Do I expect most people to have running water, electricity in America in 2124? I don't, right? But compared to the rest of the world, right? Do I expect, I don't know, a bro in Germany or France to have running water and electricity in like 2074? I don't, right? So it's one of those things where like technological civilization, Faustian civilization, industrial civilization, whatever you want to call it, it has already exhausted itself in more ways than one. Now we're just like, what's that transition point? We had a positive sum economy. Now we're in a zero sum economy where like, people ask like, okay, is the internet good or bad? Well, you can make arguments that it's good. You can make arguments that it's bad. But eventually we're going to shift over to something else, which is called the negative sum economy, where for every increase in energy, population, and technology, you get a more negative outcome, right? And we're already seeing that in more ways than one, right? Like, what negative outcome, as in, like, what does that mean? It means ILTH, ILLTH, which is like the opposite of wealth. So, like, bad health and all these other things, right? And as the ILTHs increase, people are simply going to abandon industrial civilization. First, it's going to be in trickles, then it's going to be in larger numbers, and so on and so forth. You already see it happening to a certain extent. But again, by the end of this century, I do not expect the lifestyle that many of these Western nations live. I don't think they're going to be emulated in China and Russia and, the other parts of the world, simply because, again, it has lived through its usefulness. It had its time, but now people are like, okay, well, what else can we do, right? What else can we do other than this negative sum economy we're in?
All right. Well, you know what? I think that that's all very great points, man. And I think that we agree on so much, and this has been a wonderful conversation. No, we do. We do agree on a lot. I guess
I feel humbled. I feel humbled by the fact that Sir Alexandru, who's like the chief contrarian of Substack, who always takes the opposite view.
Oh, that's what I do.
He has on the show. Yeah. You always take the opposite view of whoever you have on your show. So I was actually a bit nervous going into the show. I'm like, am I gonna play nice or what have you, right? But I'm humbled by that. Yeah.
Nobody wants to listen to two guys jerk each other off for 2 hours, right? Like that's the whole point of a conversation,
fair
right?
Enough.
You get good conversations and good ideas in opposition, right? So that's how
Yes.
I think that's how you fought. Maybe it's the Faustian spirit in me, right?
I could probably speak for a lot of people who will listen to this and will go, it's been a pleasure listening to you two guys punch each other in the face. But that's great though, because that's what I like about stuff like this is how it's supposed to be.
Right.
I mean, guys, I'm gonna have thoughts about this for the next couple of weeks.
Probably for years for me. You know what? And I'm 40. I'm 41 years old right now, so I probably won't. If things go the way you predict, I probably won't make it to the end of the 21st century.
No, you'll be fine. You'll be fine.
What I mean is like age-wise, right? But I mean, if Elon Musk uploads my brain and turns me into
your descendants, your descendants, your great grandchildren, your great grandchildren, will do excellent. They'll do excellent, especially like I try to explain to people this, and everyone's like criticizing the Doomers all the time. What I tell them is, guys, look, if I'm correct, right, 6.1 billion people. At the start of the 21st century, and I think, at the start of the 20th century, you had 1.7 billion people. If I'm correct that there's less people left at the end of the 21st century, then what that means is if you take care of your next 4 or 5 generations of your family by instilling in them the correct values, morals, and discipline and etiquettes and so on and so forth, you basically own the fucking world. Because, there's going to be a couple 100 million people left on the planet, and then it's going to be your giant clan among them. Right. So this is absolutely a positive view of the world.
Right. I that's why I tend to be more of a pro accelerationist than a doomer. But like always, on this podcast, I have this entire notebook filled with points, and I have things outlined. I didn't touch anything on religion. I didn't touch anything on interfaith cooperation. There's so many things I wanted to talk about, but I do got to call it a day because my wife's on her way back from the store. But hey, I want you back on, man.
We can always do this again.
We have to, because I think it was one of the best conversations we had. I went into it with a bit of trepidation.
I was deeply honored by it. Don't worry. Next time if you have me on, don't worry asking slightly hostile sounding questions. I'm used to that, right? So don't worry about it.
Right, and I'm a hostile person, right? I suffer from oppositional fucking disorder, according to my psychologist friend.
No worries.
Ultimately, there was so much more I wanted to talk about that had nothing to do with this stuff, but this was a fascinating conversation. I learned a lot from it, and I hope the listeners learned a lot. Let me see what I wanted to say. So, we can find your Substack. I'll link to it, and then you have your podcast. Absolutely. And you're on everybody's podcast all the time. So we'll make sure that everybody listens to it. This will come out on Friday the 8th. So it's probably going to be nobody's going to hear it because nuclear holocaust is going to get triggered on Wednesday, right?
Hey, in 2,000 years, some netrunner is going to find this and be like, choose.
Exactly.
So I'm going to make sure I have it uploaded to the Substack servers tonight. That way it can make it through the Terminator 2 Fake and Gay edition, and so we'll have that there for sure. But for everybody
after this, thank you, good sir. And after this Fake and Gay election is terminated in like several weeks later, when we finally know who the winner is, you can have me on and we can talk about some real philosophical stuff rather than like the micro-politics stuff and whatnot.
Right. No politics, no economics. We'll talk about culture and we'll talk about novels next time or something like that, right?
Amazing.
All right, man. So for you guys at home, thank you very much for listening. Good night or good afternoon, because it's like about to turn actually noon here. So make sure you like, share, subscribe, and do all this stuff to make me into the next Joe Rogan. Like that will ever happen. You know what? Our podcast's going to make it through the collapse. I don't know. We'll see.
There we go.
All right.
There's only one way to find out.
If I'm not podcasting in 40 years, I'll be in the village square yelling at people from a fucking podium or something like that, you know, with my goat ink and you know, papyrus paper and stuff, right? Or maybe I'll go become one of those Irish monks in the Dark Ages, where you know where
get your posse of boys and just like raid for like concubines. That's what you'll be doing.
That's just too much work, man. I'm just gonna go live in the desert, you know, just and inscribe for posterity's sake. All right, guys, Fisto, enough. Thank you very much once again. Fantastic show, and good night, guys.
Bye bye.
See ya. Thank you.